Greetings and salutations. You've successfully arrived at the Bloody Disgusting Network. The passage of time will now bring you to something strange, unique, and idiosyncratic. Have a good time.
My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you wanna make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of
Greetings, gunslingers, and welcome yet again to the Losers Club, a Stephen King podcast. My name is Rockin' Randall Flagburn, and today our ka-tet is off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard and Glass, King's fourth entry in his sprawling Dark Tower franchise. If you've yet to listen to our episodes on the Gunslinger, the Drawing of the Three, and the Wastelands, we'd encourage you to do so. They are way back in the feed, but they are there. And if you're looking for our episodes on Wolves of the Calla, Song of Susanna, The Dark Tower, or Wind Through the Keyhole, they're not out yet. It'll be a bit. We've got to record Dreamcatcher first. So before we dive into this book, I just want to offer a thank you side to all of our listeners, new and old. I'd also encourage you to visit our newly opened merch store at losersclubstore.com. We've got shirts, mugs, tote bags, posters, and more. I think it all looks pretty cool. I'd also encourage you to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever it is you get your podcasts. Give us 5 stars or we'll burn you in the town square. And finally, if you're interested in hours upon hours of more Losers Club content, including commentary tracks, interviews, movie reviews, and very special episodes, you can find our Patreon at patreon.com/thebarons. For example, we have a 2-hour interview there with Glenn Mazzara, the creator of Amazon's tragically on-air Dark Tower pilot, which uses Wizard and Glass as its source material, so relevant. We've also got an episode about that episode on the main feed if you scroll back a month or two. Okay, so joining me on this bloody romantic and magical journey into the Gunslinger's past is a wise and cunning panel, one I can assure you hasn't forgotten the face of their fathers. Max, say hello and tell me, Team Gunslinger or Team Coffin Hunter?
This is Wolfman Musty Mac Gerber, and super excited to talk about Wizard and Glass. You know, Randall, I am Team Coffin Hunter.
Oh, we got a bad boy in our midst.
Let's just say I might have gotten a tattoo recently, and it might be on my hand, and it might be a coffin.
I did not know. Are you serious?
No.
Oh, I thought maybe you were. I don't know. Maybe you were.
Oh
serious.
Man, what I would have to be a real coffin head to do that.
Now you put that idea in my head. Now I want to do it. What was your first experience reading Wizard and Glass?
Wizard and Glass. The first books I read of Stephen King were the Dark Tower series. And it was up here. So I remember reading Wizard and Glass on the train. I fell in love with it. I remember as soon as you hit the back, the Roland backstory, I started to kind of get like beat up against it, like I don't know if I want to do this. How long is this gonna be? Let's go. We just got off this train, and man, I felt the complete opposite way towards the end of this flashback, where I was like, oh, no, like don't leave. Like, I love this story. I don't care about what happens in the future. So I loved it the first time through. I was just thrilled, and it really gave me the drive to just roll through the next few. But I was really excited to reread it and take my time with it, and it just really sunk in more this time, reading it again and already knowing where it was going with the characters and stuff. So yeah, it really worked out for me again this time.
Yeah. Ayisha, say hello. And Team Roland or Team Jonas?
Oh, let's see. Here's Isha, Lady of the Coos or Bruja de Coos. That's a tough one. I'm not quite a fan of Jonas. But I think I would Team Roland, but I probably turn Team Jonas later on. I was gonna say, just because a flick of the wind or the turn of the wind, I'd roll with him.
The wind through the keyhole. What was your first experience reading Wizard and Glass?
This was actually my first one. I had not read it
Nice.
prior to. Yeah. So I was, there was some trepidation going into it because, of course, it's a sizable book, and I gave myself a reading schedule. I honestly forgot there was another storyline going on. Like, once you get into the point where he goes back and starts talking about Hambry or Hambry. I'm not quite sure the pronunciation. I kind of completely forgot until you got to the interlude, and they're like, oh yeah, there's a separate story going on this whole time.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. And Dan, say hello. And team Cuthbert or team Clay?
What are these choices?
Yes. This is
Trying to vary it up a little bit.
Yeah, this is Daniel John Farsons Pfleegor, because John is actually my middle name, so it seems appropriate.
Nice.
I am team Cuthbert all the way. I could be a bit of a cut up, a bit of a Cuthbert. I love like his sarcasm. I love that Roland just cannot seem to process it. I love that he has the little rook skull, and like he'll talk to it and be like, "Did you see that? What about that, Roland?" It reminds me of Willow when he's like, "Did you see that? She took our black root." Just like,
She just ate our black root.
He just ate our black root. But I just think the idea of talking to the inanimate object, and Roland is just like, "What a fool!" Like I cannot process it. But as we found out in the start of this book, sometimes it takes a fool to do a hero's job, especially when it comes to telling riddles.
And what was your first experience reading Wizard and Glass?
I also read the Dark Tower series first, and I was just rushing through them. So Walmart had a special on the paperbacks. They were like $4.99. So I think in 2005, I ran to my local Walmart and grabbed Wizard and Glass paperback.
And which edition do you guys all have?
I think it's the 2003 Stignet.
Okay.
But yeah, it's non-illustrated, purplish. I actually think it looks really cool. The cover, it has the glass with the rook skull in the center of it.
Yeah. And that's when you have Ayisha, it looks like?
Yeah, I have that one. Though I have illustrations in mine, so it says it's like the 97 version.
Oh, nice.
You might have the first edition.
Yeah, my dad basically gave me all of his Gunslinger series and all his Stephen King books, so a lot of them are first editions.
Nice. And Mac, which one are you reading?
I've got the first plume printing, the 1997, the old purple.
Yeah, that's what I got
the glass
too.
cover, and it's got the
Wizard.
illustrations.
Yeah, the Wizard and Glass, or the Wizard of Oz, like castle in the grapefruit on the front. Yeah, this is the version that I bought back in literally 97, like right when it came out. Still the same one. I lost a lot of my originals back when I bought them back in the day, but this one I always kept because this book was always so important to me. I have very strong memories of it because I was going through like an extremely hard time in my life when I read this. I had lost my both my grandpas and my uncle within like a 6-month period, and things were just really rough on the home front. And I remember being at my uncle's wake, and we were there. It was like an all-day affair, and there was a lot of family drama going on. And I remember after I'd kind of been with everybody for a few hours, I kind of retreated to this like small corner, like kitchen area of the funeral home, and I had Wizard and Glass with me, and I was like burning through it, and I was like right when it starts cooking too, like right when the big coffin hunters like frame Roland and company for the murders and all that. I was right at that point, and I remember it was such like a good immersive way to get away from kind of all the BS that was happening, and so I just have really warm memories of it because it was very transportive for me, and it was a book that I remember I didn't want it to end, and I read it then, and then I remember I reread it when I was like, I believe the summer after I graduated high school, when I was working at Sam's Club. I remember I would read it in my lunch breaks in my car, and it held up then. And then this was I haven't reread it since then, so this was my third read of The Dark Tower. And for a long time, Pfleegor and I were talking about this before, this was not only my favorite Dark Tower book, but it's the book I used to say was my favorite King of all time. And I'm very excited. I'm kind of holding off on making those distinctions at this point, since I'm on this journey to read all of King. So by the time I get to the end of the podcast, I'll see where it's at. But I don't know. I love this book. I can't imagine it not being in the top 5. I think it's rare that I'm so invested in not only a flashback, like an origin story, but because I remember also being resistant. I was like, because, I actually think the beginning of this book is so fascinating because we get off the train, which is a thrilling sequence. And then the first thing we encounter is the world of the stand. Roland and Eddie and Jake and Susanna and Oi walk into a world that has been ravaged by Captain Trips, which is the super flu that decimated the population in the stand. And we get these like hints of the Crimson King, like is mentioned, I think, in some graffiti, and we get hints of Randall Flagg, and when we were teased Randall Flagg a bit in the Wastelands as well. So I remember being like, there's so much story to tell, like in the present, and then suddenly Roland sitting down and saying, all right, we're going to this little seaside town called Hambry, and and it's a love story. And I was like, I don't want any of this. I was like, what is the castle in the distance, And then, of course, I think just like you, Mac, I didn't want it to end. He really dips you in that world and creates kind of a little, I don't know, it feels like a new world within that world, and it's that first glimpse we're really getting of before the world had moved on, is the phrase Roland always uses. So and it does end up kind of feeling like an entirely new world, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But first, a little history about this book. It was released on November 4th, 1997. It was originally due out in 94, actually, 2 years after the release of The Wastelands, which came out, I believe, around 91. And then, instead, readers had to wait roughly 6 years. And I think it's actually important to note that The Wastelands does end on a cliffhanger in which, our main ka-tet is trapped on a speeding train named Blaine, bound for death. And when we get into some of the quotes that King has about this book, that seemed to be the driving force, was how mad everyone was about having to wait that long. And it sounds like most of us read it like when the next book was readily available. So I don't think, because I got into the Dark Tower, in that space between Wastelands and Wizard and Glass. So by the time I think I'd read the Wastelands, Wizard and Glass had been out for, I think, maybe 6 months or so. So I was lucky that I did not have to wait that time. But I can imagine that was very frustrating for diehard King fans. Tell us about it. According to Bev Vincent's The Road to the Dark Tower, part of King's reticence about tackling the follow-up book came from his knowledge that a large section of it would be about the heat and passion of teen love, and he wasn't sure he knew the truth of that anymore. Suspense is relatively easy, King writes. Love is hard. And in the afterword of the book, which we'll talk more about later, King says, "It is hard to begin." He's quoting Susanna, and he says, "There's nothing in these pages that I agree with more." But once he got going, he wrote it in roughly 6 months, which I find insane that he wrote this book in 6 months. So Vincent also notes how King joked to a group of students during a university lecture, "At first I thought it would be extremely short. The train crashed and they all died. Womp womp." And this, the initial edition, I think, is also very memorable for Dave McKeon's illustrations, which are, I think compared to the ones that are in the previous Dark Tower books, are much more abstract. These are sort of like, it's kind of funny. My nephew was looking at my copy of Dark Tower, Wizard and Glass, like right before recording, and he stumbled upon one of the photos, and he goes, "This photo doesn't make sense." And he's 6 years old, and I was just like, you know what? I agree to some degree, but that's what I think I love about these illustrations. Is there's something really disturbing about them. They're kind of, they're almost like, if somebody shattered a stained glass window and then reassembled them into sort of these disturbing images. And some of them I think hit more than others, but
it was like a nightmare collage kind of.
Yeah. What do you guys think about the illustrations? Are these, things that were part of your journey throughout the reading of it?
Yeah, no. Dave McKeon's artwork's awesome. I'm a big fan of his. He does a lot of stuff. He did a lot of like covers for Neil Gaiman's Sandman comics and stuff like that, and has kind of been a constant contributor to that kind of stuff. But the imagery is just so wackadoo. I mean, I love the stuff in Drawing of the Three, and this is more akin to that. So, but it's even more abstract.
Yeah.
But I will say, I feel like they do a pretty good job of showing you the image after that sequence has happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the sequence where, and I might be wrong, where I think Reynolds is like slitting Thorne's throat. Is like, you see that picture before you get to that. So I'm like, holy shit, like, what is this? Yeah, I think it's really, really great. Especially that last one, the Wicked Witch of the East is really cool looking.
Yeah, the one with Martin too, I think is, I don't know, it's very chilling. It's one I've always remembered. So yeah, I think that's kind of the basics when it comes to history. This was a book that I found that there really wasn't a ton of context on. It's not one that King talks about too often, but this is a book that I think is kind of fiercely beloved by fans. When I was looking up quotes on it, one of our constant listeners, Bryant Burnett, he's sort of a King archivist, I would say. He's collected a lot of the physical media where King's done interviews that aren't necessarily readily available on the internet. So he helped me find some things in Fangoria and a few other things from way back, where King talks about the Dark Tower and Wizard and Glass. But honestly, some of these quotes I pulled are just more generally him talking about the Dark Tower. So I'm going to read through a few of those. And if you guys have any thoughts, feel free to pop in. From a 1996 interview he did with Joseph B. Mosseri, he says, "Wizard and Glass is finally done. It's a long book, and the manuscript I turned in was 1,500 pages long. I think it's good, and I know it's overdue. I've been getting more and more mail from pissed off fans saying, these people have been on this friggin' train for 5 years now. You ever going to finish this story? The worst one was from this lady who said she really loved the story. A grandmother of 73 with Parkinson's disease, and she had this fear that she was going to die before I finished the story. She was hoping I'd write one more before she got too feeble to read them." And then in 1992, when speaking to Fangoria, he said, "I've gotten a huge number of letters from people who like The Wastelands and who've been very angry because I sort of left things dangling in the air. The tone that comes through in many of them is shit or get off the pot. So after I get the current projects I'm committed to out of the way, I would like to sit down and do all the rest of the Dark Tower, because if I don't, I will die before it gets done. That's all there is to it. There's no reason why it shouldn't get done either, since I know pretty well what happens. There's one big creative roadblock that has been in the way, and that is the gunslinger's past has to be resolved. And I've come a long way in my mind of resolving it. After that, the rest is pretty much a straight shot to the Dark Tower. So that would mean sitting down and writing the rest of it all at once." And I think that's interesting because, it took him a long time to write this flashback book. And then he did end up writing Wolves and Song of Susanna and The Dark Tower sort of in a mad rush. Those books came out really close together. And interestingly, he talks about, if I don't write them, I'm going to die before they come out. And I think the fact that he kind of got right to work on them after his the car accident in 2000, where he almost died, I think says a lot, because he kept putting them off. I think when he almost died, he said, "Fuck, okay, now I really have to do this." So I find that interesting. But I think this book, from the general vibe I get, is that it came out easy, but I think mentally and I think he had a lot of turmoil about beginning the book, which is something I think a lot of writers can relate with. And then from a 1989 interview, this is, I believe after the publication of Drawing of the Three. So he's talking, I think a little bit abstractly about the world in total. And I just found some really interesting quotes in here that speak to the idea of magic as it exists in this world. And I think we see a lot of that, obviously, with, Maryland's Grapefruit and Rhea of the Coos and things of that nature. So he says, "It all exists in a sort of post-radiation world where everybody's history has gotten clobbered, and about the only thing anybody remembers anymore is the chorus to Hey Jude. It's a different world, but it's obviously a world that's been influenced by ours. I think that we will come to a world, if things go on the way they are, where you will have degenerate people who worship gas pumps, that sort of thing." And I thought that was an interesting quote, obviously, in this book, where we encounter a lot of kind of old gas pumps that say things like Texaco and Exxon, which are companies that are very familiar to us. King goes on to say, "Everybody in the Gunslinger kind of shrugs and says, well, the world's moved on. But the point is that If nobody tries to stop the world from moving on, inertia will take care of all of our problems. The whales will all be gone. The ozone layer will be depleted. There will be a degeneration where technology continues to progress, and there's no morality to keep it in check, as though machines would somehow solve all of our problems. So I was interested in postulating a world where there is magic. And there's magic in this gunslinger's world, but it's not a real useful magic. It's not anything anybody can control. It's more the kind of thing that you coexist with, like the wind or the rain. There are speaking demons, and either you try to keep away from them or you try to use them and take your chances. But they don't work for you. It's not like having a genie in a bottle that will give you 3 wishes. You might be able to get away with it. It's like the wind isn't there for us to fly our kites on, but there are days when we might be able to use it for that. But the wind wouldn't care if your kite didn't fly. And I thought that was interesting because magic in this book is very dangerous. I think we look at, the grapefruit. That is a very, very dangerous, relic that really wreaks havoc on people, but it's also extremely powerful. And then from that same interview, I just thought this was interesting. The interviewer says, "Did Roland kill his mother?" And then Stephen King paused and he says, "No, the dark sorcerer, whose name is Martin, who you haven't met much, is the guy who did that." And obviously we get a little bit more here. And, it isn't quite that simple, but, definitely something interesting. Before we delve into the hook, I'll just read a quick synopsis of The Wizard in Glass. This one is from Amazon, I believe. If you guys have a better one on your books, feel free to add it after I share this. But I thought this was a pretty solid summation. Roland the Gunslinger, Eddie, Susanna, and Jake survive Blaine the Mono's final crash, only to find themselves stranded in an alternate version of Topeka, Kansas, that has been ravaged by the superflu virus. While following the deserted I-70 toward a distant glass palace, Roland recounts his tragic story about a seaside town called Hambry, where he fell in love with a girl named Susan Delgado, and where he and his old tet mates, Elaine and Cuthbert, battled the forces of John Farson, the Harrier who, with a little help from a seeing sphere called Maryland's Grapefruit, ignited Midworld's final war. Is that similar to what you guys have?
I don't really have one on the back of this. It's more just like, Stephen King returns to the Dark Tower, blah, blah,
right.
blah. They don't give you. So that's a pretty good summation, I think. Also, if you're back then and you read that and it says the thing about the superflu, aren't you losing your mind?
I know.
I'd be so excited to get to this book and then so furious when, 500 pages of the book are not that. But yeah, Jesus.
I know, it is wild because this book, I think, really blew my mind when I was younger because it does introduce, it blows up like the Gunslinger's world in so many ways. And I feel like this is a really seminal book in connecting the dots of King's world, like where suddenly all the books started to matter. And he talks about that in the afterword, which we'll talk about later. But he really, and I feel like it's so funny that he does that sort of in the bookends of the book. He introduces all these elements that tease the future and tie into his other works, but then, completely cuts us off from that in the middle of the book. And the story is so good, it doesn't even bother people, I think, who get through it. So I think just kind of a fascinating book in that regard as well. But let's talk about the themes of this book in a section we call the hook.
Ah, yes. Don't you see? Don't you see how clear it all is? Not only can you see the future, I can change it. You can change it, exactly.
Here in the hook, we talk about what is this story about? Which, obviously is a broad question. That is a very good thing to ask here. I have a few different themes that I've written down. I think that this book is an origin story, which is interesting in itself. It's also a story about first love. It's a story about friendship. And it's a story about that, really, I think, like I said already, it blows up, I think, Midworld as we know it so far. So I wanted to talk about some of those ideas. But, on page 92 of my edition of this, the Penguin Plume edition, King has Roland basically lay out why he's telling this story, like why this story is so important. He says to Eddie in the ka-tet, he says, "I'm not sure you need to hear, but I think I need to tell. Our future is the tower, and to go toward it with a whole heart, I must put my past to rest as best as I may. There's no way I could tell you all of it. In my world, even the past is in motion, rearranging itself in many vital ways. But this one story may stand for all the rest." Yeah, I feel like it's interesting and necessary for King to sort of justify this flashback, in the context of the journey that these characters are on, especially after all we've been through in the last few books. I guess, like, what do you guys make of the idea of doing a flashback at this point in the story? Like, why do you think we get it here? And instead of, continuing on, this path to the Dark Tower, why is this the time to dig into Roland's past?
So I think it actually ties to some of the theme of the book of the thing that you want that you can't have, right? Which I think speaks to the journey toward the tower in a broader sense. Mm-hmm. It's not just, Roland wants his mother to not have the affair. He can't have that. He wants Susan. He can't have that, he's chasing all these things that are just out of reach. And then even if you look at like the big coffin hunters, right? Jonas wanted to be a gunslinger, and it's just the thing that was just out of reach. So I think it's a lot about what you maybe covet and that you just can't not possess.
Yeah.
That's kind of an interesting other side of a point, or the thought that I had was like, all this time, as at least for me, especially not knowing the entire series or like being very new to it, there are a lot of questions or like hints that are dropped where I'm like, I know it's clear that it's connected to something, but I don't know what, or it's like slowly piecing together. And for me, this flashback was a lot of like connecting the dots. So it was like, at this point, I've been coveting these answers to some of these questions, but even though I've gotten some background, now there's even more questions, because especially at the end, and I won't say that part now, but there was a point where I was like, okay, wait, what do I understand exactly what's going on? Or there's like more questions that were thrown at me along with those answers that I'd been coveting for so long.
Yeah. And what would you say are some of the answers that you received in this book that you'd been waiting for?
A little bit of, especially Roland's character, because they hint throughout, like, the things he's had to give up to follow the path of the beam, and like what it really costs to go after the tower. And there's a certain part where he talks about, I think it's when he finds out kind of like Susan's fate and kind of what's going to happen, or he postulates what will happen to his friends, or I think he's flashing back. There's a point, I can't remember exactly where, but the idea of like what he really has to do to lose a part of who he was, but to be onto this path, and the things that he had to be willing to give up, and why he is kind of the Roland we know from the first 3 books.
Right.
So that was a lot. And like just little hints of like what certain places and things are, or connections were with like the inner baronies and the outer arc. Like I had a little bit better understanding of like what the realms surrounding the Dark Tower kind of felt like, and what Roland's world was before time moved on.
Right. Yeah, I want to talk about that more in a little bit as well. But I think that's a really good point. And I think that so much of the previous books, we get these flashes of his past, and it's very clear that there are certain things that he, that have made him the sort of, emotionless, broken person that he is. And we know one is a lost love, and we know one is the idea that everyone that's close to him, he has been in some way responsible for their death. And I think that there is almost a haunting, something haunting about going back and meeting Cuthbert and meeting Elaine and meeting Susan, and knowing in a sense that these people are all doomed in their own way. And I think this book also really fills in, it really helps like you said, it like really helps piece together all these parts of Roland that have been really fuzzy, because we get so much of it is in these flashbacks to, you know, he thinks about court all the time, right? He thinks about his parents all the time. He thinks about all of these people. And this book really does help frame what it was his life looked like on like sort of a day-to-day basis back then, which is something we don't really get. And we also, you know, really see the origins of the tower here and like what sparked that journey for him, which I think are sort of really key aspects that have been, you know, more or less a mystery throughout this entire book. But I remember thinking that, you know, well, obviously, since we're seeing Cuthbert and Elaine here, this is when they're going to die, you know, because we have to see all of these things. But and we don't. And I mean, I think that is information that will be meted out eventually. But it is interesting. And I think when Roland says this is the story that stands in for all the rest is really telling, because clearly he's lost a lot of people in his life, and he's had all these massive losses throughout his life. But this is the one for him that, you know, was the initial one that galvanized him toward the tower. And really, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say also something that struck me just now too that I liked in the book was the connections where they constantly reference kind of the man who Roland would become. Mm-hmm. Like people would get glimpses in certain defining moments that kind of was also a connection between the Roland we've been knowing up until this point and the Roland that they knew in the past. So I kind of like there would be a flash of his face of the haggard man or the haunted man in the future, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. No, I thought it was interesting how his friends too, you know, he's the first to become a gunslinger. So it creates a little distance between them, you know, even though they've been friends since they like shared a wet nurse. And I think during this trip that they're going to get a closer connection, you know, the ka-tet is going to strengthen. And then I think, there's moments where Roland sort of takes an even further step, right? He disconnects even more from everything except for the Dark Tower. And I think there is that moment of realization on his friends' faces when, you know, his hair is going gray from looking into the grapefruit. And I think they kind of realize, like, we've lost him forever. Like, we thought with Susan we lost him, but now he's totally gone to the tower.
Yeah.
I mean, almost completely. When you're returning, he's like a ghost, essentially like a shell of a man. I think it's just such a beautiful story in this one, because having Roland at the end, this is something, I feel like him telling Eddie, Susanna, and Jake this story is so out of character for him. Yeah. To actually be sitting down telling, hey, here's my entire backstory. And all of my friends have died because of me, or so he thinks. And, you know, and this is probably your future as well. Like, what a risk to take. But he says, you know, that he loves them so much. Like, he's really turns a corner here where, you know, he loves them enough to tell them and have it be their decision whether they want to continue. And I think
my question is, would you guys do it after hearing that story? Would you be like, yeah, let's do this?
Well,
I'd be like, nope.
I think it's like they're so deep at this point they can't go. So.
Yeah, they're like, well, you dragged us this far, dude. Yeah. Like, I guess we got to go with I guess I might be impaled on a tree, you know? Like, yeah,
I know.
It's too funny.
I feel like Oy is probably the scaredest after hearing the story with that vision.
I know, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, bringing up how seeing the old ka-tet helps contextualize the current ka-tet more. Obviously, Eddie and Cuthbert share a lot of similarities. I think they in the ka-tet they sort of serve as the same archetype, and then I think Susanna and Elaine share you know, a certain quiet purpose and sort of steely determination that really speaks a lot to what he finds valuable about them. And I think also what draws him to them, which is, you know, and I think that does happen when you get older. Sometimes you make certain friends and you become close to them because they do remind you of somebody who was very important to you, and they can fulfill a certain role for you that somebody else can't fulfill anymore. And so I think weighing these two ka-tets against each other is very helpful. And it does, I think, deepen the bonds a little bit for the reader as well, to understand, you know, that just because Roland is annoyed with Eddie a lot doesn't mean he doesn't love him, because we do see that same relationship was manifest in him and Cuthbert as well. So yeah, I think that is some really important stuff that we needed to see. I was also drawn, and Ayisha, I feel like you mentioned this. It's our deepest, most clearest glimpse at the world before it, quote unquote, moved on. I mentioned that we see these oil tankers with Texaco, Citgo, Sunoco, Exxon written on them, but everybody, in this town of Hambury kind of ignores them almost. They're ancient machines that can't help us anymore. But John Farson sees the potential in harvesting this oil and using it to, revive the old machines. And I think some of the context we get in terms of Farson's plan, I remember that being, for the first 3 books, the concept of John Farson, the concept of Jericho Hill, because we never saw Jericho Hill. I know it's in the comics, but we never saw it in the proper books. Those were things that were always fuzzy to me. Like the collapse of Midworld was always fuzzy to me. And this book, I think, was important in helping me to understand that and who John Farson really was, what he was trying to do. All of that, I think, is very important. And but then also in telling that, connecting. And this is, obviously this is a book that connects the rest of King's books to the Dark Tower saga in so many ways, by seeing, The Stand, by seeing Randall Flagg, by seeing The Crimson King. All of these things are starting to integrate. Just like when we read this book, we see, what is the phrase that they use for the old people's weird horseless mode of travel when they see these rusted cars that, kind of still exist in this world. And there is this sensation that, the world that they're living in could very well be, centuries ahead of our own world that is recognizable to us. And it draws these sort of strings between our world, this fantasy world, but also all of King's works, and the world becomes really fluid in that regard. And there is a lot of discussion about that. The phrase that I wrote is, this is a world that has experienced multiple quote unquote apocalypses. And the world sort of keeps redefining itself and changing. And I think understanding that stuff is super fascinating. And it also does help set up some of the later books as well. So, any thoughts? Like, what was it like to, did you guys have any moments of, oh shit, when you started to see, these glimpses of the old world, things that are familiar to us as readers?
Yeah, I mean, just seeing everything so, I want to say pristine, but everything's already shot to shit then, it just even is more now. But seeing, I guess, just the innocence with the group, and as they move into Hambury, and we get, like Ayisha was saying, about just seeing more of Midworld in general, and really kind of getting a map in my head of where things are actually located. Yeah. And just how far things actually are. And now, and then also knowing how Roland says sometimes, like, he's been traveling forever because time is kind of messed up now, and you don't really know, locations aren't exactly where they used to be. They might be like years ahead of you now, kind of thing. Right. Crazy stuff like that. But yeah, I always love when they throw all that stuff in there. It does remind me a lot of like Castle in the Sky. Did you ever see that?
The Ghibli movie?
Yeah. How there's like all these machines that used to, this is this bygone era of like machines that's like no longer there, but like then some of them start coming alive, and it is strange, but I also feel like it's, I could easily see this being our future. There were like multiple apocalyptic nuclear events, you'd see all these cars and just kind of think, oh, this is the old mode. That is interesting.
It felt like a broken down steampunk, which is one thing I really liked about too, the Dark Tower pilot, was like everything did look a little rundown and steampunkish. And I think they mentioned in the book too about like stretching out a rubber band and how it kind of distorts time and distances. So I thought that was really neat, but it does remind me too of like having driven around parts of America, even like, areas that are kind of ravaged by like the opium or opioid epidemic, just seeing like businesses that are boarded up, and just certain towns where you're like, yeah, it does feel like time has moved on. And especially with the ka-tet coming from, Gilead or Gilead, which is kind of the higher end, well-to-do city. So for them to see the Hambury, which is not going to be up to what they're used to seeing, it must have been very especially impactful on them.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say that I think that Roland and the ka-tet's like counting of things speaks like volumes. Sorry, speaks volumes because it's so important how much of everything that there actually is, because there's nothing left really.
Yeah.
I mean everything, and then because all the stock is like half of it's mutated or. So it's so important that they go out there, and I know they have ulterior motives, obviously, but like that, but the town is used to that. They know that this is kind of something that people go and do in these towns. And I think that's just like, that's kind of eerie, just knowing that like, there's just really not a lot, that they're
was
really
anyone else trying to like visibly map in their head? Because again, I got that post-apocalyptic, like this is our world or maybe a parallel of our world. And I was trying to see in my head potentially what parts of like either the United States or like South America or like wherever this could possibly be as like a future of, especially when you get to the point where he starts kind of transitioning into more like Spanglish with the town. And because that part really, and it kind of distracted me a lot and when you think of like the distances of time that they talk about with how time is like a face on the water, it's constantly like distorted and pulled. It made me wonder, like, how is the barony set? Are they aware that like there are different beams in it? Like, how cognizant are people in the outer arcs of like how the worlds work and how there's a connection and that there's a dark tower? Are they mostly oblivious in certain spaces or certain worlds?
Yeah, that's super interesting.
I might be getting my references mixed up, but aren't there the bird, the bear, and the fish, and like I know that that's something that Susan says, but isn't there? And maybe I'm getting mixed up with the pilot now, but isn't there like a store with those names on it?
Mercantile.
Yeah, like I think with the old world and the beam and the old Guardians of the Beam, I think they're aware of those things. I don't know how much stock they actually put in it actually being real, but I think it's kind of just like whether it's legend or just passed down or just kind of, offhand religious kind of, like when people talk about the Bible, stuff that happened in the Bible or whatever, like I don't know if they really believe it necessarily, but they know it existed at one point.
Yeah. I compared almost to like constellations where there are animals in the sky that, maybe more people believe in the Bible, but constellations, obviously there's people believe in astrology, but in general, it's like, oh, those are those animals that are up that, like we can kind of point a few out ourselves, but we forget that back in the day, like people could look at the sky and immediately identify because it had much more of an impact on their lives. But I also think the fact that Hambry is sort of going through this collapse, it would make you have less faith, right? People wouldn't believe in this higher power if all you do is look around and see decay and death.
Right.
And I think that's in part what Farson, the Man in Black, Crimson, I think they're encouraging this sort of departure from the old ways. They want the crops to fail. They want the city to collapse.
Well, and to that point, they're so desperate to believe in that kind of antiquated stuff, especially at the end, like, so much so they burning people at the stake, because they want their crops. It's kind of like they'll do anything to hold on to that. Like there is something else, but whether we know what it is,
of, like, you still do it even though you've been doing it for thousands of years. You have to do it because that's the way it's just been done.
Yeah,
you don't really have that connection to the why, or the why has was it that one tale they had about the two lovers?
Yeah,
each town had a different version, but and they've told it for thousands of years, but the really where and the why and the how, does it really matter? Is one of the questions kind of they produced to it or like posed to it.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that even Cuthbert and Elaine they call the Dark Tower itself like that's a myth, right? Like when Roland is like, we need to go there, they're like, it's not real, dude. And so I think that it does speak to something that in the like once the world has moved on, those things became a lot more important, and they became sort of the saving salvation. So you mentioned the Man in Black. We actually get the Man in Black returns. We get a reemergence. Walter comes back here, but we also get this story of, and it is like clarified here that Walter and Martin are the same.
Is it?
I'm so confused,
I know,
and they mention them as separate people at times.
There's moments where in the book where I was like, okay, this is where it's going to be cleared up for me because I know when we were reading the last few, especially Wastelands, I was like, when do they clear this up? Like when does he go back and fix that? So I can't remember when they do that.
I feel like I read somewhere, maybe it was on Reddit when I was trying to find out myself, and I don't know if they said, I think they said like King was like, it kind of left it up to be confusing. Like there's some answers to it, but it's really generally just supposed to be confusing. Like there's not supposed to be real clarity to who Walter or the Band of Black or Martin really are or is.
Well, I like that he mentions, oh, sorry. I like that he mentions, I think it's page 406 in my version, that they say, oh, maybe he may be Farson's sorcerer. And that I mean, that obviously that to me connects it to, Eyes of the Dragon, but I don't know. And again, it's hard for me because I also just watched the pilot where they definitely they had to abandon one name and have another name, and who is it actually supposed to be? And but Randall, was it clarified for you? And can you pinpoint it?
Well, it's clarified that Martin is Randall Flagg. That is 100% clarified. As for Walter, I guess I just always assumed it was the same, but I don't know if I have like that exact revelation.
I feel like when Jonas was speaking with him, that's when it kind of became clear to me. When Jonas is interacting and they're discussing, and I just got to say, side note, that I love that scene with Jonas and the Man in Black, because they keep saying how the Man in Black is just sitting there tittering and just like cracking up, and it reminds me in The Big Lebowski, my favorite scene is with Knox Harrington, where the dude visits the house and he's just like, hey, and he's just like, dude, what the fuck is up with you, man? Like he's just like sitting there laughing.
Keeper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just like, what Keeper. Are you doing?
What if the Crypt Keeper was the Man in Black?
Oh my God.
Hello, Jonas.
Crossover on crossover.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the questions I wrote is what clarity is gained, which I think proves that there is still not total clarity here. But I think what we do learn is that Martin obviously had seduced Roland's mother. We get this scene where we learn about Roland having lost his virginity, I believe, to a prostitute, and his father comes in and he has these moments with his father where he kind of sees that his father has known that his wife has been cheating on him, that Roland's mother has been cheating on him. And it's, obviously a very tragic kind of moment for them. And like one where he starts to actually see his father as a human being for the first time, like a broken kind of man, and which is, a very moving scene. But then, we do learn that, that there's a lot of shame built around the entire family over that whole situation. And then later, obviously, when Roland is back, he is tricked by Martin into shooting his mother and killing her, which, is kind of all tied up in this familial shame that kind of, destroys that family unit. And I will say that, like when they see Flagg at the end, he does hint towards all that. He says, how's the family, by the way? I seem to have lost touch with them over the years. I was always such a lousy correspondent. I will say it's so hard for me. And I feel like because King wrote this right after the Stan miniseries premiered in 94. And I it's like written tailor-made to Jamie Sheridan's line deliveries. Totally. Like I can't read those lines without thinking of Jamie Sheridan. I mean, to me, it's really become the iconic performance over the years. But yeah, so in terms of clarity, but we do also get this clarity that, Walter is in league with John Farson. And I've read online, and this is not clarified in this book, and I honestly don't remember if it is in future books, but that John Farson and Walter are also the same person. So
that's interesting because I wrote down page 404. It says the good man, once a bandit, now much more. His sigil is the eye. And when they're talking about Farson, so I thought Farson was the Crimson King.
Yeah.
But again, it's not super 100% clear. Could they not just be
all like representations of one thing, like a manifestation, but not quite? You know what I'm trying to say is like they are all linked to one main thing that it takes different forms in different time periods, but it's like they're all separate people but connected to one thing.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. Because I know, I mean, obviously in the future, things happen where you're like, okay, well, that clarifies that to an extent. But I think the idea that maybe they're all kind of like extensions of this being in a way, because he is this magical creature almost, you know?
And if you've read the Nathaniel Hawthorne, Young Goodman Brown, it's a story about a guy encountering the devil, and they call John Farsons the good man throughout this, which is a reference to that. So I've also thought that Farson might be Flag, and I believe they describe Farson as very tall and thin, but we've seen in other encounters that Flag can kind of manipulate how he appears to people. So he could almost be pretending to be Farson, giving a speech, showing up at a different part of the Hambry. So in my mind, that's how I take it, is that they're not separate. But it also doesn't really matter. They could all just be agents of the Crimson King anyway.
Right. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. But I feel like some of this perhaps is clarified in the Dark Tower. I've only read the final book one time, and I remember it being sort of an onslaught of information. So it's like I'm looking forward to getting to that book to kind of really clarify a lot of these questions. But I honestly like the lack of clarity doesn't fully bother me because it does. I think kind of it's compelling in its own way. I think we've kind of established that just with this discussion. And I think it also speaks to, I think there's something eerie about it, and as well as Walter's tittering, I think also just the general concept that Jonas, like he keeps moving when Jonas isn't looking is very spooky to me. And he's kind of like always behind him in some way. I think it's like it's cool to see Walter in this context, I think. Like outside of Roland and engaging with other people I think he's a really kind of terrifying villain. And I thoroughly enjoy him. So yeah, I think that, and I also wrote, what questions are we left with? And I think we kind of touched on plenty of those. That's the thing is I think, King has even said that he wanted to write, the Battle of Jericho Hill, like as a book. But he just never really has found the right way in, because I think that is a really key battle. And I've not read the comic. I know perhaps Mac, you have.
I have, yeah.
Oh, Dan, you have too?
I haven't, but I have it. I'm probably going to visit it after this because I gotta see what happens.
Oh, in the kingdom of the blind, the man with the comic is king.
Yeah, and I just feel like there's probably more answers to be had there, but I don't think King is fully interested in answering a lot of those questions. He's much more interested in character, and I think that's really clear in this book, because I think one of the great strengths of this book is that these characters are all so well drawn, from Roland to the ka-tet to the big coffin hunters to Susan, obviously. I think these are, and then I think what this book does such a great job with, and we'll talk more about this in Heroes and Villains, is the concept of the wild card. Like, I think there's there's a couple really, really intense wild cards in this book that I think make it that much more explosive, but we'll get to that in a moment. And then I also just want to touch on Marilyn's Rainbow, because this is obviously a very key component of the lore of this world. And it's almost this happenstance that, these young gunslingers stumble upon it. But there is kind of a lot of info dump about what these things actually are. In 437 of my book, I'll just read a little bit about this. So essentially there's 13 different balls in this, the wizard, what do they call it? The wizards. Wizard's Rainbow. Yeah, the Bends of the Rainbow. And so here's some history about all of them. We tell stories about the black ball around the fire sometimes and scare ourselves silly unless our fathers caught us at it. My own dad said it wasn't wise to talk about 13, for it might hear its name called and roll your way. But black 13 doesn't matter to you three. Not now, at least. No, it's the pink one, Maryland's grapefruit. If the other balls in the Wizard's Rainbow did exist, most are broken now. Such things never stay in one place or one pair of hands for long, And even enchanted glass has a way of breaking. Yet at least 3 or 4 bends of the rainbow may still be rolling around around this sad world of ours. The Blue almost certainly. A desert tribe of slow mutants, the Total Hogs, they call themselves. Total Hogs is a very funny phrase.
Love it.
Had that one less than 50. I feel like we should call ourselves the Total Hogs from here on out. Sorry. Had that one less than 50 years ago, although it slipped from sight again since. The green and the orange are reputed to be in Lud and Dis, respectively, and just maybe the pink one. What exactly do they do, Roland asked. What are they good for? For seeing. Some colors of the wizard's rainbow are reputed to look into the future. Others look into the other worlds, those where the demons live, those where the old people are supposed to have gone when they left our world. These may also show the location of the secret doors which pass between worlds. Other colors, they say, can look far in our own world and see things people would as soon keep secret. They never see the good, only the ill. How much of this is true and how much is myth, no one knows for sure. But we do know. John Farson is said to have a talisman, something that glows in his tent late at night, sometimes before battle, sometimes before large movements of troop and horse, sometimes before momentous decisions are announced, and it glows pink. So, and we know that the ball is, in safekeeping, quote unquote, with Rhea of the Coos. It's been dropped off there by the big coffin hunters who are in league with John Farson, and that ends up being a wild card object of its own throughout this story. I figured it was good to set it up there because there is a lot of lore surrounding that ball, and something that I'm sure we'll talk about more. But yeah, let's move on and talk.
Well, I was just gonna,
go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say it's. The Lord of the Rings connection here is like super strong with the lost seeing stones, the Palantir, the black ball that like Denethor sees the black ships coming, and it's very much that idea. And I kind of love that it's being used in this way for this story, for this, this is essentially the Lord of the Rings for Stephen King, but
yeah,
even the way they describe it.
Yeah, the same reaction to the ring is what people have to the grapefruit in this. And I also, see what it does to Rhea. Yeah.
They were created too, like during the time of Arthur the Eld, to kind of cut the power of man, which is very similar to the Lord of the Rings. Because in Eyes of the Dragon, Flag's character, I forget if it's Merlin's grapefruit that he uses in that one, but he spends a lot of time looking into one of the bends. And what's neat is in that he has like a sand clock, like a timer. And when he looks into it, he flips it because you can only look for so long before it starts to eat you away.
Yeah, but
and you can see that Rhea in this. Rhea did not limit her exposure.
No, she was
going in a lot harder. And I think in it, because it is associated with the color orange, and I believe the breakers. What are the lights?
I know now you're getting ahead of yourself.
No. I'm just gonna. While we're talking about the bends. Yeah.
Wait, are you referring to the deadlights?
Yeah, the deadlights are associated with orange, and I believe that it might be. It seems that a lot of the monsters are affiliated with a certain color. Because
it's interesting because they do mention that they are on the path of the bear and the turtle. I think.
Right.
It's like the opposite ends. So. Because it's definitely mention of the turtle, and that is heavily mentioned in it. So I wonder if like one end's pink and the other is
yeah.
And
no, that's super interesting.
And I was going to say, if you touch the bends with blood on your hands, it can suck you into it. And I think it's in the comics that Flag mentions that there's like a demon affiliated with the pink grapefruit. He calls it like his sister. So I don't know if that's by blood or if it's just he's so familiar with it. But yeah, no, I'd like to see, like, it would be great to do an episode that we just track the different bends of the rainbow and which ones actually get mentioned.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll write that down. Cool. Well, let's talk about first love. This is obviously a love story, and that was the most daunting part for King. Can't really blame him. A man in his 40s writing about hot teen sex is a little bit weird. But it is, I think, important in Roland's journey here. 14-year-old boy, 16-year-old girl, and they fall in love. And I think that I just want to ask the general question. It's like, do you guys think that this is an affecting portrait of teen infatuation? What works about it for you? What maybe doesn't work about it for you? What is your general reaction to that?
I think, I was sitting there thinking, there's some silly pound cake in this, but none of it for me revolves around Roland and Susan. I think it's actually really well done. And I was really it was really gripping and really visceral. And then they like drop, oh, and she's 16 and he's 14. I was like, oh, you're like, let me, hold on a second. Like, let's back this up. Like, I don't know if you need to go in all this detail.
Yeah,
but
I noticed that at the beginning.
It is funny because I think it's actually pretty beautifully written, and really, really well done. And I think it captures that kind of first infatuation really well. But that's just me. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the fact that they made her a couple years older is great too, because in Gilead, Roland is seen as a man now. He's a gunslinger, but no 16-year-old girl is going to look on a 14-year-old boy and be like, "That's a man." Right? she's always going to be a little more intimidating to him, despite the fact that he's earned his guns. So I thought it was a very beautifully written love story. I remember at the time reading it, just getting really invested in Susan and developing a crush on her.
I think we all did.
Person, legally it's fiction.
I don't know. I was kind of into Irma.
She was,
but I just and you feel bad for the situation she's in, because she seems just like a good-natured person, and she started to become this woman, and immediately the town is like, now we need to just take advantage of her. Everyone in her family just wants something from her. And her dad is the only one that you could tell really had her best interest in mind, and I think that's really sad. And I don't know, it's a doom. It's like star-crossed lovers.
Yeah, I think Susan is a great, and we'll talk more about this in Heroes and Villains, but I love that she's a character who isn't defined solely by her relationship with Roland. There is a lot of other things going on with that character, but yeah, just some quotes here that I think are beautiful, because I think what really works for me about this exploration of love is that it's not portrayed as sort of this innocent, beautiful thing in a vacuum necessarily. What this book really captures is the idea that there is a carelessness and an arrogance and a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. A lot of fuck ups like in this relationship. This is a very sloppy relationship that ends up really impacting everyone else around him. And I think that it really speaks to, I think it is first love. I think, but I think the thing about most first loves is it's first infatuation, and I think infatuation is the word I use a lot with this, because that's what I relate to most about this story, is that idea of being so consumed with someone. And obviously the swiftness of this relationship, this all unfolds very quickly between them, which I think is very accurate for that age. And then also, the way that the love can't exist in a vacuum. It can't exist without its tendrils sort of, getting involved in everyone else who is in these lives. Those are the things that I think make this.
What about, interested to hear the female perspective on the love story.
Yeah.
Hey, you're very quiet over there.
I know. I was thinking a lot of things right now, honestly, because just going back to the first point of like what you all were saying about even their age, it was, and I don't know if King wrote this deliberately or this way or not, but like kind of how he constantly wrote her as a woman. Mm-hmm. And then in the off note or the side note of like, but actually she's 16. She's still a young girl. And they portray Roland as he's just this boy pretending to be a man. And it really made me think of like how in society too, like we look at women as you have to be more adult or they have to be older. And there's that whole dynamic too of like the younger boy and the older woman. So a lot of that, I'm not saying that this is what King was doing intentionally, but I constantly was like, why is Susan being portrayed as this like woman who kind of knows more, should know better? But then it kind of made me think of the like society at large of like the blame always goes to the female, even though she's a young girl and she has no idea really what she was doing, and the decisions she made were done when she was being manipulated by other people. And when I see her relationship with Roland and how she engaged with him before she found out that he was much younger than him, she seemed almost like, it seemed to almost like not euthanize her, but made her more like youthful or younger,
or like infantilize.
Yeah, thank you. And the way she responded, like it seemed like all these things that made her suddenly a woman and very strong, or like independent, or like how her father, quote unquote, raised her, kind of like went to the side when it came to Roland, and then she was just kind of like this young girl who didn't really know what she was doing, so this is why I'm back and forth and kind of quiet, because there's points of it where I'm like, I guess this is what young love, when I think about my first relationships as a young woman and like how I responded to people. But then also she just seems like she just kind of lost herself with him, which I guess that's the point of young love. See, this is why I was quiet, because I'm like going through all these emotions as I'm thinking about
it's muddy.
The different sides with that and what was like influencing their relationship and the dynamics of how people viewed who was responsible and who wasn't responsible.
Yeah.
Well, they definitely hold her responsible at the end, unfortunately.
Exactly.
I was going to say, a couple of quotes that King includes in the beginning of this is one's from Romeo and Juliet, and it's absolutely that. Plus, if you think about this world in terms of when you become a man, you're becoming a man at a much younger age. I think that people aren't necessarily living to their 80s and 90s. It's probably that era where you're dying in your 40s, 50s. So it's kind of a weird lens. But they're really young in Romeo and Juliet too. So I kind of got that feel from it.
There's actually, I noticed several references to Romeo and Juliet just while we're on this.
Oh, really?
So Cuthbert, Roland refers to him as Ka May, which means Ka's fool. And Romeo and Juliet, Romeo says, "Oh, I am Fortune's fool."
Interesting.
And then I'll save a Macbeth one for later. But
awesome.
But but I think it's hard to have teenage lovers though without at least acknowledging the story that everyone knows, right? Everyone knows Romeo and Juliet, so it's impossible to write about it without reference.
Yeah. The difficulty, I can understand the difficulty of him having to write young lovers, because like I'm vaguely remembering what it was like, and so I kind of want to be, or my first initial response to kind of this whole storyline at first was very cynical, like this is too fast, and who falls in love with like that, and like now they're forever passionately burning for each other, and like if you love me then love me, and I'm just like, who says all this in the beginning? And then I'm like, oh yeah, when I was young I was definitely this foolish. So.
I was definitely that in love with someone who.
It's also because you've never had your heart broken, right? So you give yourself completely, and then after that, your first breakup or your first time it falls apart, a part of you can never quite be as open, but they're meeting each other at this perfect time where I don't think either of them has had a true love like this ever before. And Roland had like a prostitute, but I think he had a little more going on with him that day.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how also every time they hook up, apparently he can always make her orgasm at the age of 14? That was probably one of the things.
Penetrative orgasm.
I would just say that's very much a King thing. I don't know if that's just a Roland thing.
Let me just say,
the men are all dynamos.
Roland is the one telling the story here, so
that's true.
I think he's maybe embellishing a little bit. I could see him like saying that like as he's like drinking coffee at the fire, like looking over the cup at them, like seeing if they're buying it.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, yeah, I was the greatest she ever
had.
And
she definitely got hers every time.
Yeah.
Roland's like, so after 6, 7, 8 orgasms, we decided to talk about the Hambry, and they're like, Eddie looks at Jake like,
I know, I was imagining Jake just being like, what is he talking about?
It's like Susanna's just like sucking her teeth, like, yeah, okay, Roland, like this is what's happening.
Like, we're still talking about this? Like, what time is it? We're still trying to check in with him about what time it actually is.
Like, so Roland, anyway, the grapefruit, and he's like, hold on, as she twirled her tongue on.
I was wondering as I was reading, I was like, he's going into great detail on some of these things. It's like, is this important to the story?
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll get to some of those perhaps in when we get to Pound Cake. But yeah, speaking of Romeo and Juliet, this is a very, Shakespearean kind of moment on page 316. With when they lose their virginity to each other, and King kind of ties that moment to the larger tale of tragedy, and he says, so were lovers joined in the barony of Meges near the end of the last great age, and the green moss beneath the place where her thighs joined turned a pretty red as her virginity passed. So were they joined, and so were they doomed. So
he definitely marked this for a different reason.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm just saying in that moment, he really does kind of play up the idea that tragedy is in the stars for these people. Like, we know that. And yeah. But I think that the moments that are perhaps more affecting for me, I have on page 303. It's just, I think, a lot when King allows himself to I don't know, rhapsodic about young love. And he says, who can remember the pangs and sweetness of those early years? We remember our first real love no more clearly than the illusions that caused us to rave during a high fever. On that night and beneath that fading moon, Roland Deschain and Susan Delgado were nearly torn apart by their desire for each other. They floundered for what was right and ached with feelings that were both desperate and deep. And, yeah, there's a few sections about that where they kind of touch on the idea that you can never fully, he seems to acknowledge that you can never really fully capture that passion, but he's at least stating that he's trying to. Are there any other moments between them that resonate for you guys in terms of, I don't know, something that perhaps felt true to young love?
I think when she first officially got to meet the ka-tet, Cuthbert and Alan were kind of like, this guy, he's kind of losing his focus here. There's a little bit of resentment. I've experienced that on both ends of, someone's dating someone new and you're like, oh, they're kind of changing who they are. But then even Cuthbert, I think, admits like, there was kind of a jealousy too. Mm-hmm. But then I like that she kind of fits in and it's that thing of like, oh, now I see why my friend likes her. And I thought that was captured pretty well.
Yeah, I love that. That dynamic actually is... The thing is, Cuthbert is both right and, he's right in a lot of ways, but he's also driven by that jealous impulse, which to me is very true. I think I related a lot to Cuthbert when I first read this book.
He was right for all the wrong reasons.
Well, also, Susan, when she first, I think, really sees Cuthbert, she's like, well, had I seen him first, maybe, you're just like, yeah, these are kids.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have it really figured out.
A hint to like future, like with Cuthbert and Roland, because there's points where they talk about how like Roland always gets it first. Gunslinger, woman, lost virginity, all that things happens first, and he's always coming second nature to Roland, even with this girl.
Yeah, I agree. And I think some of those sections, I wrote down some of the stuff here where, you've called your carelessness love is what Cuthbert says to Roland. And again, that's a harsh way to phrase it. And I think Cuthbert does walk back from that to some degree, but there is a kernel of truth there.
Made a virtue of irresponsibility.
Yes,
I have. Follow up to it. It's great.
Yeah. And I've got that on page 408. He's reflecting, Roland's reflecting on it. After, they're exposed. And he says, yet what haunted him more was what Bert had said just before leaving. You've called your carelessness love and made a virtue of irresponsibility. Was there even a chance he had done such a thing? Over and over he told himself no, that the course he had ordered them to follow was hard but sensible, the only course that made sense. Cuthbert's shouting was just so much angry wind brought on by nerves, and his fury at having their private place defiled so outrageously. Still... and that's where he begins questioning himself. And he says, did I do something wrong? And then a few more pages later, he admits that he's been a fool. And where's this line here? He says, Ka must serve his love. He says, but so he had, Susan's voice, Ka like a wind, if you love me, then love me. So he had done, believing in his youthful arrogance that everything would turn out all right for no other reason. Yes, at the bottom he had believed this, then that he was he, and Ka must serve his love. And that ties in, I think, later to when he talks about the mistake of thinking that love could somehow be apart from everything else. I think those were, like, it's that idea that he could do it, that him and Susan could have their fantasy and it wouldn't have any consequences on, every other aspect of their life. When something is that all-consuming, it can't not bleed into everything else. And I think that is something that's a hard truth about love that we learn as we get older. Dan, I loved what you said about, your heart is more open and I think that's what when we get nostalgic for our first love, I think that's what we're being nostalgic for was the open-heartedness with which we approach those relationships. And I think too, what that ties to is love is uncomplicated when you're young. It doesn't, you don't think about the ways in which falling in love can, radically change your life. It can change where you live, who your friends are, your relationship with your family. Those things complicate what ostensibly when you first encounter it feels like the easiest thing in the world. And so I think that was a really key component if you're writing about young love, is writing about that realization that it's never as easy as it was when you're young. But also one of the hardest lessons to learn is that it fucks your life up in a lot of ways.
Avril Lavigne said it best. Why'd you have to make things so complicated?
Right.
And I also... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ayisha.
No, go first.
Go
ahead, gentleman first.
I was just gonna say, all you have to do is look at his like fling with Allie in the first book.
Yeah,
it's just so far he's absolutely not the Will Dearborn who you see in this book,
Yeah,
and it's just like things change. Yeah, it's not the same when you get older. You start pushing everything away at like arm's length in terms of that. Like he's so far into the quest at that point, like he cannot connect with her on any real level, and it's really shitty how that goes down in the first book. And I think that's why people don't like Roland in the Gunslinger, because he's kind of just this gruff, like, shell of a man. And so I think that's also why the Tower heads love this book, because we really get to see why Roland is who he is, and how he's kind of reconnecting with that with these kids he's dragging along.
I know, because and the story really does become about an empty shell becoming full again, with these people. And I think that ends up kind of becoming the real story of the Dark Tower as it goes on. Hey, I guess the real how does that phrase go? It's the friends we made along the way. So Ayisha, what were you going to say? Yeah.
Think of, I'm suddenly blanking on the Japanese word, but it's kind of like when they take a broken thing and they repair it with gold in the cracks.
Yeah.
And so you have this original ka-tet that Roland's had, his original concept, or like not original, but what happened to him, starting at this point with Hambri and everything that went down up until the point where he meets his new ka-tet. And he's like letting people in, and he's slowly filling these cracks with a new kind of coal, because it's not only about refilling, but also like repairing what was broken so that he can be stronger in what he needs to do with the Dark Tower. And there's a point even before we get to Wizards and Glass, when we're in like the Wastelands, where he's understanding that he needs these people to be able to actually do anything of in real import. Like he needs to be filled up with these golden fillers to make himself stronger and support him through this.
Yeah,
Kintsugi.
I love that.
Kintsugi,
yeah.
Golden Repair,
Yeah.
Kintsugi, I think that's really cool too, because I'm always breaking shit and then being like, I should throw it away, and I'm like, no, I should repair this. And
with gold, some of the gold,
and then I end up throwing it away.
I just have gold lying around.
That's how all my old G.I. Joe figures were repaired.
Cobra Commander has a golden arm.
Any other thoughts on love? I also
a lot. No.
How many hours
in general? Just in general, Randall?
It's terrible. It's a terrible thing.
Great.
Love stinks.
No. Well, I had friendship on here as well, but we kind of ended up touching on a lot of those things, which I think makes sense because these are intertwined concepts. I mean, I think that's the thing is Roland's love can't help but intertwine itself within his friendship. And I agree. I think, Dan, you mentioned this, that the fact that Susan does, in her own way become part of their ka-tet later in the book, and that, Cuthbert accepts her, she accepts Cuthbert, and they kind of do become, for a brief period, this really kind of badass little unit, is something I think is endearing and, in its own way adventurous. It contributes to the adventure. And, yeah, I love that.
And she's replaced by her counterpart, Oi. Later, no, I'm just kidding.
That's her counterpart.
Shimi also kind of becomes part of the group.
Yeah, Shimi plays a big role.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. I do. Yeah. The friendship in this too, like between Cuthbert and Elaine and him, like it's true blue.
Yeah.
I think it's so real.
I was like, maybe Cuthbert, at least he has Shimi. That's his Susan.
Yeah.
Can't do everything he did like Roland did, but
Yeah, like Roland and Susan are making out in the corner, and he just keeps turning over, like looking at them, and then he comes back, he's like, so that's the end of the joke, Shimi. And Shimi's just laughing. All he has is to tell jokes to him.
He's like, you're so funny, Cuthbert.
Yeah,
I'm real funny.
And I do think, that concept of friendship and the idea of bonds, and the idea of bonding onto somebody too. Specifically, I mean, we have that with Roland and Susan, but then, Cuthbert and Shimi, the fact that they kind of bond together, and Shimi becomes bonded to Cuthbert is a very sweet thing, and something that I think is part of that larger exploration of the ways that there's almost something otherworldly about the way these ka-tets come together at least in this world, is that there's almost like there are forces that draw people to one another. And I think that that's, another theme that I think we see here, but I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about friendship and stuff. But before we move out of the hook, this is not necessarily thematic, but I feel like this is a good place to discuss it. The afterword of this book is, to me, something that I obsessed over when I was a kid, because King teases the future of the Dark Tower series, and says some pretty bold things, and I figured this would be a good place to talk about them, because obviously we do, we get Randall Flagg, like the Stand version of Randall Flagg in this book, as well as the world of the Stand, the Captain Trips, and all of that. We get those connections, and then in the afterword, King is talking about how kind of the universe of his writing. He says, "I have written enough novels and short stories to fill a solar system of the imagination, but Roland's story is my Jupiter, a planet that dwarfs all the others, at least from my own perspective. A place of strange atmosphere, crazy landscape, and savage gravitational pull. Dwarfs the others, did I say? I think there's more to it than that, actually. I'm coming to understand that Roland's world, or worlds, actually contains all of the others in my making. There is a place in Midworld for Randall Flagg, Ralph Roberts, the Wandering Boys from the Eyes of the Dragon, even Father Callahan, the damned priest from Salem's Lot, who rode out of New England on a Greyhound bus and wound up dwelling on the border of a terrible Midworld land called Thunderclap. This seems to be where they all finish up, and why not? Midworld was here first, before all of them, dreaming under the blue gaze of Roland's bombardier eyes." And I thought that was so striking because, I think just the concept of hearing Father Callahan's name again pop up in this context. We knew that Eyes of the Dragon was connected and, with Flagg and everything, but Roland is essentially teasing that these characters from Eyes of the Dragon are going to pop up in later Dark Tower books. And then he also mentions Ralph Roberts from Insomnia. And I think anybody who's read Insomnia knows that that book is pretty deeply connected to the Dark Tower. There are direct references to Roland in that book and the Crimson King. But I think what I thought was, I'm just going to share this little anecdote here. I used to troll the message boards, Stephen King message boards, and I used to, talk about the afterword of this book with those people and like, what is the future of the Dark Tower? And what I loved, because I think anybody who's read Insomnia, it's, we kind of know what Ralph Roberts' role is in the Dark Tower. It's not necessarily that he's going to return in Midworld, but rather that he fulfilled a purpose in Insomnia. But I read all these people who were talking about how Ralph would resurface like in Thunderclap and stuff. And has anybody here read Insomnia?
I did the episode.
Okay, you're rock on. I think it's funny, just the concept that this like 70-year-old man would pop up in Midworld, like in a town like Ambry or something,
or even Thunderclap.
Like, hey, it's me, Ralph. From everyone's favorite book, Insomnia.
Well, the way that afterward reads, you would think that all of those characters are going to show up in the next book,
right?
And that's not what happens.
I'm assuming not. I haven't read it yet. So
no spoilers. No spoilers.
Thunderclap is a land, because it's Thunderclap to the Kala is where the wolves ride.
Yeah, and they mentioned they mentioned Thunderclap at the end of this, that it's the next destination essentially. But yeah. So not a huge spoiler to say that much, but we'll hold off on the rest. But I remember people were like writing their own versions of with those characters that are mentioned, of like how they envisioned it playing out, and they were so wrong, like in hilarious ways. But I was too, because I was also one of those people. I
was saying I'm doing the same with the Song of Ice and Fire, because they're still 2 books back, and I've just been reading theories and message boards for years now, so I can relate.
I know
you're all going to be disappointed.
Oh, I know. Well, I think so long as it doesn't go the route of the final season of Game of Thrones, I won't be disappointed. before we move on, I just want to talk a little bit about Roland's vision on page 570. I'm not going to read this whole thing, obviously, but this is a pretty trippy section where Roland kind of disappears within the grapefruit, and he sees a lot of various visions that are all kind of channeled through the Wizard of Oz, and which is, obviously a running theme throughout this book. But I think like some of the things we see, like a tree, like a crooked clutching hand on its topmost branch, a billy bumbler has been impaled. It should be dead, but as the pink storm carries Roland past, it raises its head and looks at him with inexpressible pain and weariness. Oi, it cries, and then it too is gone and not to be remembered for many years. And then suddenly he hears the voice. It is a voice he knows. It is the voice of the turtle. He looks and sees a brilliant blue gold glow piercing the dirty darkness of Thunderclap. Before he can do more than register it, he breaks out of the darkness and into the light like something coming out of an egg, a creature at last being born. And we see various other kind of things that hint towards what's to come, including the tower itself. And I think that was very interesting because you can sort of see the confidence that King has in the future of this franchise. He seems like he mentions in that interview I read earlier that he did have the rest of the path mapped out. And I think this is sort of his trailer for the future of the Dark Tower franchise as it's written.
And that's such a change for him too, because he doesn't normally chart out where his books are going to go. So I think what you said, Randall, too, like he might have had a renewed vigor after the car accident or the hit.
Yeah.
That he was like, okay, I really do need to settle down, finish this, and he kind of gave himself a path to do so.
Yeah.
Also very bold because after having taken such a long break after Wastelands, like everybody complained about the cliffhanger ending with that just because it took forever to come back to it, and when people just thought maybe he's not going to come back to it. So to do this and really be like, oh yeah, I've got 3 books that I'm going to write, like all right up against each other, and here's all this stuff that you can look forward to. What if he had taken another long break after this? Like, people would be like, what the fuck, dude?
I mean, it was like, when did Wolves come out? Was it like 2002? Because this was 97. So it was 6 years between Wastelands and Wizard and Glass. So
I think they all came out. Well, when they came out like 1, 2, 3. Because I knew that when I was looking ahead, like, we've got to cover these. Like, I was like, man, that's going to be a lot of Tower in a row. But I'm sure we'll figure out ways.
2003.
Yeah. So it was another
Susanna,
6 years. Yeah.
Susanna 2004.
Yeah. Then Dark Tower was what, 2005?
Yeah,
that's
2004
wild.
Also, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I remember being so shocked, like, when that happened. I was not expecting that because I'd been so conditioned to have to wait 6 years in between things. So cool. Well, let's move on to structure and format.
Look at me. Look at me, teacher.
Here in Structure and Format, we talk about the structure and format of a book. This one is interesting because we sort of have the flashback, the flashback novel that is sandwiched between, the current narrative, which is certainly a choice. I mean, how did you guys I think we had kind of already talked about the idea that that's relatively daunting to basically get invested in for about 100 or so pages in the journey that's happening, and then realize that we are gonna basically leave all of these characters for the most part and do that, and then we come back at the end to a very sort of weird I don't know, almost an epilogue where Roland encounters Randall Flagg of all people, and he's saying, you are Martin. We've got the TikTok man coming back from the 3rd book who's all fucked up. He's screaming my life for you like the trash can man. And then we sort of get all these teases for what's to come. So I think it's a unique structure in that way. I can't think of another book that King's written that is structured that way. But yeah, is there anything that stands out to you guys, like in the general voice of the novel? I think one of the questions that I had was, is the way that the book is written. Is that how Roland is reading it to the ka-tet, or like reciting it to the ka-tet? Or is this sort of an omniscient voice that is interpreting what he's telling the ka-tet?
Well, you think that it's just kind of like an omniscient voice that's just, like we're getting way more detail than they are. But then he goes out of his way in that interlude where they're like, how do you know all these details? And right? Don't they mention it? He calls himself, he's like, well, like I was like, oh, it's like, are we to believe that he's actually recalling? Oh, it's that he can recall all these things what happened that when he wasn't actually there.
Yeah, well,
and
it's because of the rainbow. I think it's interesting that he found a way to sort of incorporate the rainbow into the structure of the story. In that that Roland actually saw all the different things that happened around him to help better flesh out the story. Which is also, it's kind of implied that that's sort of what broke him even more after he got back, because the story of after they got back to Gilead after this, and obviously what happened to his mother, it all kind of contributes to the idea. It's almost this like emotional and information overload. He experienced all the pain that Susan went through when previously he didn't, have to actually see the look on her face when she died. Or actually, I take that back. He did see it in the rainbow, but I think seeing all of the things that led to it, which is what he sees later, is really interesting. But yeah, there's just a couple moments that I found bizarre. And this has been in previous King books too, but on page 393 of my edition, they're talking about the guns, and it says 2 of the bundles contain single and this is a chapter that is focused on Jonas, by the way, but it says that 2 of the bundles contain single 5-shot revolvers of a type then called, for no reason I know, carvers. And I'm like, who is the I? Like, who is that I? Because it never happens anywhere else in the book. And then on page 462, we just get another moment where there's parentheticals, and it says, was the pony named Charlie? Eddie Dean asked Roland. I think not, Roland said. We have a rather unpleasant word that sounds like that in the high speech. What word? Jake asked. The one, said the gunslinger, that means death. And that's the only time in the book that happens, where in the middle of the Hambury narrative, we get these parentheticals of them talking around the fire. It's just a very, like, they seem like narrative or like, structural and formatting decisions that King made in that telling that he maybe thought were cool ideas, but never manifested anywhere else. And so I guess like it's one of those where I think that there is a little bit of shakiness in terms of how this voice kind of translates in this page. Did any of you guys catch any of those things?
I saw the I, and then I like went back a few pages to be like, did I miss like a transition of like how we were telling the story? And then the part with Eddie, I was wondering, I was like, Charlie, and I was like thinking of the train, but at the same time, I was like, what else is important? Or why did he specifically at this point decide to include Eddie asking about what's the horse named Charlie? Like, was it supposed to be a hint to something? Or was it just like him trying to be silly and just like remind us that there's another story going on?
Yeah.
So I was kind of confused.
Yeah, like Charlie the Choo Choo too. That's where the name comes up, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But I thought with the structure, because it starts with the in media res, where it starts mid story, and I really like the first like 100 pages or so where they're continuing the riddle contest.
Yeah.
And I don't, the fact that these books are continuous, it doesn't really matter where one starts and stops. So I didn't mind as much the structure being a little different in this. But I really like, and we'll cover it when we get to the heroes and villains, but I really like the Blaine sections. I thought those were awesome. Like, as soon as I jumped in, I was like, yes, we're back on this train. And you really feel that locomotive engine.
Yeah.
Whereas the end, the only issues I had with this book was that sort of part at the end that got tacked on. I would have been better if the falling action was after Hambury and we kind of ended the novel there. I feel like a lot of stuff got kind of rushed with the Emerald City flag, TikTok man. It just it occurred in like a 50-page span. It's not even that much.
It's like 50 pages.
Yeah, it's a lot of information.
Yeah,
like, and I
was saying, I would have been better if they had set that up for the next novel. But it really felt, I could have used another 150 pages, 200 pages of that stuff, and it's just sort of a weird. it felt just way too rapid fire for me.
Mm-hmm. It almost makes me wonder if he wanted to end it with like Randall Flagg appearing or something and then just end it right there. But then he didn't want to do another cliffhangers because he didn't want to get, angry letters for another 6 years. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because there is just sort of
sound in rapid succession. It shouldn't matter.
I know, right?
But he waited another 6 years for the next book, essentially. So
I know
he was going to get it anyways.
So cool. Any other thoughts on format and structure? Structure and format. However we want to phrase it. I think it works. It's interesting for King. He loves to, it's cool. Sort of funny because, he does this all the time in books where he, will break things up to do a flashback, but usually, it's 20 or 30 pages, and here we get 500, 600 pages of it.
I honestly didn't know we were going to like jump into this whole story. I thought it was going to be short or like into like maybe pockets throughout. Mm-hmm. And then it was kind of like, oh yeah, we're gradually, I realized that this is the full story. And I kind of forgot about Eddie and Susanna.
Yeah. It is super interesting. So cool. All right. Let's move on to talk about the characters in a section we call Heroes and Villains.
I'm gonna have to kill this fucking clown. Welcome to the Losers Club, asshole!
Welcome to Heroes and Villains. Here we talk about our favorite characters, our least favorite characters, what works, what doesn't, what we learned about these people. Obviously, I feel like Roland will kind of weave in and out of these conversations because the Roland we'll be discussing in this section is not, the Roland that I think we've been with the first 3 books, but rather the 14-year-old Roland, who is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Just kidding. He's still kind of a little freak, but he's got a little more life in his eyes. I think a good place to start would be Susan. So, I guess like what I was going to say earlier about Susan Delgado is I like that we spent a lot of time with her before she, her and Roland become consumed with each other. And we learn that, she had a father who was really well respected. They don't come from means. They were, a relatively poor family. And one of the only options for her to, be well off in this town is to essentially become, the side piece for the mayor of the town, Mayor Thorin. He takes in a woman, takes care of her, and then she has to give him a baby. And he's a very, unpleasant man, not the most, not the greatest turn of events for her, but it is something that, in this town is considered, I think, something of, an honor to be affiliated with this person. She gets to go to all these fancy parties. But then we also, we learn a lot about her connection with her father, how important that was. And we also see that she lives with this aunt who is, very domineering. She has kind of evangelical mom energy. And is very terrifying in many ways. She's very strict. And and we also just learned that she has this passion for horses. She has a passion for the land, and she's incredibly smart. So what else did you guys make of Susan? And, and Ayisha, I'd love to hear you elaborate a little bit more on sort of some of the issues that maybe you were having with her. So
I was actually... there was a point where I started laughing at all the times they mention or other people refer to Susan, like Autumn's treat or his gilly gal, or like all these different elaborate ways they've referred to her. As a character as a whole, I mean, she was all right. I don't feel like I had an affinity for her. She just kind of seemed like someone to help move along the story, but she wasn't like quite important. I guess she is important to Roland's story in the sense of like showing him as someone who loved someone at one point and lost that. But I felt like she could be placed with any person and it would have been the same thing for me. But I don't know. Susan, I think I got kind of, when I first am introduced to her as she's coming up to see Rhea and she goes through that kind of whole point. There are certain points with her I did identify with, especially with seeing Rhea and having like the chastity test, basically. And there's a point I think you mentioned when they first consummate her and Roland, and they talk about her bleeding into the green grass. And there was just like this kind of like archaic view of like women and their chastity, and like yes, we hold them to these standards, but there's ways for them to get around it. And this idea that Stephen King kept playing with of like she's both ignorant and coy, but very like deceptive and knowing and cunning. And I couldn't figure out if he was like saying that this is like a female character, like these are womanish ways, because there's a point where he says like women are weak but they can't be cunning. I don't know, I did not enjoy Susan.
The character just did not sit right with you.
No, but going back to what I was saying, where there were points where I did identify with her, it was like her being assaulted by Rhea, and like that kind of feeling of like this is what you're expected to do, but it's still like you're fighting this idea of like what is expected of you and what's honored, and like how women are kind of in that role of like you subjugate yourself to these kind of like injustices because that's what's expected of you, and you have to do it so that you could survive.
And these are your elders, and
right. Like you kind of have to like, this is the role that you're put in. Like the only other way, because your father died, you don't really have anything else in this world. And there was an interesting point, and I can't remember who said it, where they mentioned that no one in the kingdom ever tells people to remember the faces of their mothers. Everyone's always reminded to look for the face of their fathers. And I was curious, do we even really get an idea of like who Susan's mother was?
I have no sensation of it. Yeah, I don't remember.
No. Yeah, because the only female character in her life is her aunt, who is messed up, and it seemed like there was no like real strong or like pertinent female character in her life outside of like her mother, her aunt, and then you have her father, who is no longer with her, but that was her saving grace, I guess. And so I was like, who is Susan outside of her father? Who is Susan outside of like Cordelia?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
And I don't think we ever get to really find out. I mean, sadly, I think I like Susie Greengown, as Ray calls her. I mean, I hear everything you're saying. I think I was just looking. I was viewing the character as someone that is in a situation where it's like, well, she has to do all these things to get by. But I do love that moment where she calls out her aunt and is like, you don't ever get to talk to me like this again, and kind of like stands her ground finally. And I think like she is forced to grow up so fast in a matter of, well, I guess, I don't know how long are they actually there? It's for quite some time.
A couple months, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a couple months.
Like almost like half a year.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, but then as much as we feel like she's growing up, like, you know, she gets thrown on the stake. So it's kind of, it's a rough go. I would have loved to see them develop her more as this went on, and maybe, you know, there's some circle of the wheel where that happens. But yeah.
It just felt like she was a girl that stuff happened to.
Yeah.
And Roland happened to her. Her father dying happened to her. Her getting, you know, and she would stand up for herself. I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of now victim blaming Susan. Now I feel bad, so I should shut up.
No, you don't have to feel bad. I think it's a valid perspective. If there's one big critique I have, I would say that I felt most close to her, or I think maybe the most affected I was by her was when, I wish they had set this up a little bit better, but when she shoots the deputy and she is like, this is a guy I went to school with, you know, I wish that, and King does show that she has roots in this town and that she knows all these people. I think one of the problems he has later in the book is he tries to introduce too many locals, like that he hasn't spent kind of enough time developing. And like by the end of the book, there's so many names of like these various ranchers and farmers and all these other people that I feel like I lost you know, a certain connection to them. But and Susan does talk about them a lot, but I wish that, like they did with this deputy who she knew since she was a child, and then she killed him, and she's really it helps her realize the gravity of the situation she's in. And then also, I think it would have hit harder and her character would have been developed a little bit more if they explored more of her roots within that town. So not just her relationship with him, but like, what is her relationship like with these farmers? And like, it touches on it a little bit, but I feel like that's where a lot of character could have been developed. And I think that the scene where she is brought on the wagon to the stake where she's burned and all these people that she knew, she used to see around town are basically screaming at her and throwing fruit at her and all this stuff, which is I think a very affecting sequence, but I think it would have hit even harder if the roots of her in Hanbury were explored just a little bit more. I think that's like where the character lacks for me. So
she seems very disconnected from, and that's kind of one of the other problems I had, because they, like you said, they mentioned offhand that she has these like connections. Like they mentioned she had a best friend at one point, but it just seems like she's this like outside auxiliary figure that it was moving outside of the town, and like they know of her and she knows of them, but outside of like her aunt and the mayor, she and Maria, I guess there's nothing really connecting her to this town. So when she does get taken to the stake, I'm just kind of like, it didn't hit as hard as it would have, like you said.
See, I think too, even like, and Roland says like when she does kind of start to reflect on killing that guy, he's like, it was him or us, and I think that's the mindset that she kind of has to adapt from Roland, is like, we don't have time to reflect on this right now. I kind of, it reminded me like of Belle from Beauty and the Beast a bit. I feel like everyone in the town kind of like knew of her father, was like, oh, she's like blossoming into this beautiful young woman, but she does seem a little different. I liked her. I related to her because when I was growing up, a witch stuck her finger in my ass.
Oh God.
Stuck her finger in a lot.
Yeah, I had a sorceress check my virtue. No, but I think even from that scene, like you do kind of feel like she's getting thrust in this situation that she really has no control over. And I agree with Ayisha. Like, there's a lot of things happening to her. I remember really liking her when I first read the story. This time when I knew what was going to happen, I don't know if I just didn't allow myself to get as attached to her. But when I was first reading the story, I did not know that the fate that was ahead of her. I remember really liking it. I might have been a younger guy too, and was just like she set up, and King sets up kind of these idealized women for his characters, right? You write about this sort of fantasy woman that her every whim is just about advancing your story, and that doesn't always make for the best character development in some of these books. But in general, I liked her, and I felt very like sympathetic toward her plight.
Yeah. I think King's always struggled with female characters, I think, throughout his writing, and I think writing a teenage girl is probably even harder, for him. So I think he's probably going to hit some of those roadblocks. But I think as a love story, I still find it pretty affecting, and And I just wish we could have seen the Dark Tower pilot play out a little bit more, because I feel like there would have been an opportunity to really grow that character even more so on screen, especially with what we saw. But I want to mention too, I think we all keep going back to this, the scene with Rhea and where she checks her virginity, which is, the very beginning or one of the first, I believe, scenes that we get when we do flashback. And I think that that's such a brilliant entry point into her story, because like you said, Ayisha, it is about her being subjected to these things and kind of like realizing the weight of the new status that she's about to enter into, which is one of, mostly subservience. And it also really does frame the power dynamic, the idea that, Rhea is not, I think, like the most respected member of the community, but she is an elder in this sense, and she does have power. And I think those things do matter in the fact that she can do what she does to Susan, which is essentially, sexually assault her while she's checking her virginity, is, it's grotesque, and it also does set up that idea that she has to sort of grin and bear it, which is essentially what she's doing with Mayor Thorin,
Well, and I thought the symbolism there too, I think, because Pat Delgado was a horse rancher and would raise horses, right? Mm-hmm. But I feel like now his daughter is almost being made into livestock in the way that they check the genitals of the horses and, the health. I feel like it's sort of sad that that's the path his daughter now has to go down.
Yeah.
And you guys hate her. But she had to go through that. But.
Oh, well, I just think it's also funny, or not funny, but interesting how he decided to start out like, so she's supposed to be this, if we're going to King's like kind of trope of like female character, she's kind of like the bright, clean, shining virgin, and her first, I guess, assault, or her first terrible thing that's happened to her outside of her father dying, is going to this woman in the woods. First, having to go out there by herself, and then having to submit to that. And it's not, I thought it was an interesting choice for him to go use a female character to be this violator as opposed to another male character. It almost, I don't want to say it's like almost set up that like this is the beginning of her, like she's already lost some part of her virginity in a way because this woman has incited something with her and taken something from her. Yeah. And it's just the beginning steps to the end of Susan.
I think that's a good observation, and I think there are a lot of female villains in this story, especially because I mean, Aunt Cordelia is not great. Rhea's not great. There's not the
Coral Thorn. Yeah,
Coral Thorn, I guess, shows moments of having a spine, but yeah, there's not a lot. Yeah, I guess other than
she was about to be a badass, and then they just made her like the love interest of Jonas, and
I
got upset with that.
And he was also a dynamo in the sack. We heard many times. So
with his hurt leg.
No, that checks out. You know, he was going to be a gunslinger, and so if you're going to be a gunslinger, you know, you got to be.
That's true.
Well, too, apparently.
That's a part of the requirement.
They don't talk about that, but Court also tests them on that front too.
He's like, "Come at me, maggot!"
Fill up their genitals to make sure that they're
stimulate me, maggot.
Oh God, oh, Jesus.
So I think it might be a good point. We've been talking about Rhea. I think it might be good to pivot over into that character. She is, I think, easily for me one of the most interesting and vile and wild card characters in this story. It's kind of fun because we meet her so early on, and I don't think that. I think that it's surprising what a huge role she ends up playing in the entire story, because she just seems kind of like this kooky witch who is, you know, just gnarly and nasty. And I think when I first read the book, I figured this would be the only time we would see her, you know, is just like this scene would be in service to Susan, and this would be just sort of a fun side character in the world of King. But I think by giving her the grapefruit, and once we kept revisiting her, it's kind of like, okay, this woman is a ticking time bomb, you know? And she's also a very dangerous woman because she has the ability to do magic. She's clearly, you know, pretty rotten inside, like based on what she does to Susan. And she's got this, this wildly powerful magical artifact in her possession that she is obsessed with. And I think that those aspects of it to me are extremely interesting and make for a really interesting character. But what did you guys think about Rhea or Rhea? I always said Rhea in my head, but it's probably Rhea.
I said Rhea too. Like, what's Danny DeVito? Rhea Perlman.
Oh yeah,
I said Rhea, but
I've just said Ray. Like,
interesting.
I've read it as Ray of the Coos, the weirding of the Coos.
So, what do you guys make of this character?
I was going to say, I really like her. And she appears briefly in Eyes of the Dragon, but she's known as Rhiannon the Coos, which I think is kind of interesting. That she's almost like Flag, where she adopts these.
Well, I wonder if that's a relative or if that's actually her, because it is a lot later.
I think it is her, but I think that she's almost like Flag in that she's a creature that kind of can come and go over the centuries.
Well, that makes sense because I always thought that she was kind of a distortion of Morgana from the Arthur legend, where she's obsessed with the quote unquote charm of making that Merlin kind of teaches her, and then even in that, when she learns the charm, she kind of in certain versions she does become. It sucks the life out of her. She does become this old crone, this old, Craig, where, her, Mordred doesn't recognize her and stuff. So it's very, very much that. I love this character. She's so scary and weird and creepy. And I also wanted to ask, Roland mentions at the end of this that he met her again. And then I think Eddie gleans that from his eyes that what he means is that he killed her eventually. Do they talk about that in future books?
I don't know if we want to spoil it, but I will say
or just whether they address it
in
or
the
not,
comics.
Remember
they address her confrontation with the gunslingers.
Because I didn't remember them addressing it.
I remember there being closure with her in the latter books, but I don't remember specifically what it was. So I'm looking forward to reading.
Yeah, I think in Wolves they might
me too.
get at it. But can I say one thing about her origin that's kind of interesting with Eldred? I think they talk about this in one of the forwards for the books. It's not big spoilers or anything, but in the comic they get more into it, that there was this gift of the laughing mirror that was an enchanted mirror that when you looked in it, it made you look like a fool. And it was shattered in this attempt to get a reflection of the Dark Tower. And she actually got a piece of it in her eye when she was growing up. And it sort of put her in this dark path. And Jonas also, he got a piece of it in his heel when he was little.
Oh, interesting.
And it just sort of, it almost wasn't their fault, but they were almost damned by having this like dark magic in them. And you get the impression that, it's one of the reasons Eldred couldn't pass the gunslinger test was because he was sort of doomed to be a fuck up because of this mirror. And Rhea as well has a shard of the laughing mirror in her.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it gives him an air of tragedy, I think. Which is interesting. I love this quote about Rhea that's on page 118. I think it just really sets her up as, a very, I think I like you just calling her scary because I think that works. At the top of the hill, the wind lifted her hair away from her ravaged face and brought her the moaning whisper of the thinny, which had eaten its way into the far end of Eyebolt Canyon. It was a sound few cared for, she knew, but she herself loved it. To Rhea of the Coos, it sounded like a lullaby. Overhead rode the moon, the shadows on its bright skin stretching the faces of lovers kissing. If you believe the ordinary fools below, that was. The ordinary fools below saw a different face or set of faces in each full moon, but the hag knew there was only one, the face of the demon, the face of death. She herself, however, had never felt more alive. I think that's a great introduction to that character and really does show that she exists, outside of this community. She is somebody who looks down at them and is like, I know more than all of you. But at the same time, there is this frailty to her that, it doesn't, there's nothing about her that resonates as all powerful. But at the same time, you have the feeling that she has the capacity to destroy all of these people. So,
and one thing I like about her too is her deterioration, which I believe they mentioned in the Glenn in the pilot for the Dark Tower series that they cast her more as a bruja in the TV series, and that she was going to age over the course of the season, which is cool. And I like in this story that she has this snake around her neck, and it essentially dies from malnutrition, and it's just sitting there rotting around her neck. She's like urinating on herself. She's become so addicted to this mirror. It's just crazy to see, and when they have to take it away from her, she's such an addict.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I love, and then it's just, she's such a terrifying figure in the final. Because for me, it's like the last 100 pages of the Hambry story is just thrilling. Like it moves like just such a great period thriller. But I love that she's always being dragged around by various people in her black cart, holding, just holding the grapefruit and giggling and laughing and screaming and shouting doom sayings at everybody. And she comes across like a cuckoo bird, in those moments, but then that she's not dangerous. But that's the thing, is she's always dangerous, throughout all of it. And I think that no matter how much she deteriorates throughout the book, she maintains that level of malevolence and terror and the capacity for violence and danger, because it really is she's the one whom really ensures that Susan is not just punished but killed. And I love that she's still alive at the end of the book, because that's a figure that I think is a terrifying one to kind of haunt the rest of the series. So
there are parts for her that I also wonder when she would look. And I'm saying fake because I wonder if she was that cunning, where she would pretend to be afraid of certain things or certain other people. And most people, when you see sometimes their stories, they kind of, especially in King sometimes with the male counterparts and how they view the female characters, they can't expect them to do such cunning or malevolent or devious things. And so I almost felt at times she would play to Jonas and make her feel that she was actually this feeble, like broken, crazy bruja, but she really has all this great power, and it's almost like there's more power in people disbelieving what your potential is.
Oh yeah,
as opposed to them knowing exactly, which is what happens with him and the gunslingers too at the beginning.
Yeah.
And there are those that really believe in Rhea, like Musty and Ermot and the cat and the snake. I've got to say, I don't know if we're going to talk much about Musty, the old muty cat, but there's a moment on page 127 when Susan hisses at the cat, and it said, Musty's look of surprise was eerily, and in this case, comically human. And all I could think of was like Tim Heidecker's like,
like, how dare you?
Yeah. Oh God, I love Musty and Ermot's the relationship between Ray and Ermot is. We talked.
Was
about
I reading
that
right? Were they,
yeah, you're reading it right. I had to reread it a couple times. See, like, is this really happening?
Yeah, it's interesting that like that's kind of she hates Roland so much, like because he kills her snake, you know, like
snake lover.
the depth of hatred she has over Ermot is so interesting. Yeah, I'm such a cat lover that Musty, no matter how evil King tried to make that cat out to be, I was like, she better be feeding that thing while she's staring into the grapefruit. I'm worried about that cat's health. I love Musty. I would take Musty in and make him a sweet little house cat.
Yeah. I feel like he was just there. He wasn't a bad cat. He just lived in
He's got a bad owner. Yeah.
I think we need a new pet bandana, like Littlest Musty.
Littlest Musty. Yeah, I don't think that one will sell
the cats.
as well. Yeah. The littlest kitties. I think you mentioned Jonas, Ayisha, and I think that would be a good character to chat about next. I mean, this is a character I think is a really fascinating villain. He has so much like kind of built-in story, and I love what you said about the mirror, Dan, because that just gives him, I think, like if there's anything that I think there's sort of a pathetic quality to him that comes from his background, that he's a failed gunslinger, but I think also adding in the idea that he was almost cosmically doomed by this mirror gives him even more dimension. But I think there is a lot of dimension to this character. He is you can sort of see that he is somebody who, like, he has a real depth of character, but then you kind of see how, I think I even have in the cemetery, some of the moments when he goes to the gunslinger's cabin and the ways that he defiles it, you know, and he does it so casually that there is sort of this clinical workman-like quality about him when it comes to, you know, cruelty and terror and the things that he needs to do to accomplish what he needs to do. Like, he can be cruel if it means doing his duty, but at the same time, I never get the vibe that he's like a sociopath or anything. Like, this is a guy who seems to feel a lot because, you know, Roland basically breaks him by mocking him for failing as a gunslinger, and he can't get over it. Like, he carries that burden with him. But then you also see that people still, even though he is, you know, to Roland a failure, you know, to all these other people, he is someone to be feared and even lusted after, because we see that with Cordelia and with Coral Thorn. Like, he's a hot commodity in this area. But yeah, what do you guys make of Jonas?
I feel like it's kind of like failing out of the Navy SEALs training camp. I mean, you're still a badass that you made it that far. So I think the fact that he, you know, I love the scene when Roland fights Court and he's like, I would hate to see you broken and set upon a blind path. And now we're seeing what the blind path is, and it's Jonas, right? He had all the training. He maybe thought he was ready too soon, and he fucked up, and this is what happens. This is the fate that could have just as easily been Roland had Court defeated him, right? So
yeah, which is super tragic. Yeah,
right.
Super tragic.
And so even when he's like mocking him, it's kind of sad because you're like, yeah, well, Jonas maybe wouldn't have been so evil other than the mirror, I guess. But had he made it, you know, he could have just as easily been in your position. But it also lets him, he's one of the ones that deduces their true identities a lot sooner, right? Mm-hmm. The big coffin hunters, as smart as they are, they can't tell.
Yeah, he doesn't underestimate them as much. He feels like something else is going on. And you're absolutely right. I mean, Court's father breaks his legs and sends him west without his guns, you know? And I love that. I think at one point they mentioned that he has like a sham, quote unquote, sham gunslinger's mustache. Yeah. So I always pictured him as like cross between Keith Carradine and Klaus Kinski.
Oh man. I see him as Sam Elliott, honestly.
Yeah, that type of character. Yeah, right. But yeah, just like very dangerous I don't think people understand how dangerous he actually is. And so I love when they kind of slowly reveal that he was a failed gunslinger. I think it adds so much to that character, knowing that there's kind of like this weird connected history with Court's father and stuff. And it's kind of like, the bells ringing. I don't know. It's an interesting connection.
I love his intro too, and I think you can tell that King really likes this character just by his intro. It says a game of patience was laid out before him, black on red, red on black, the partially formed square of Court above all, just as it was in the affairs of men. In his left hand, the player held the remains of the deck. As he flipped the cards up one by one, the tattoo on his right hand moved. It was disconcerting somehow, as if the coffin were breathing. The card player was an oldish fellow, not as thin as the mayor or his sister, but thin. His long white hair straggled down his back. He was deeply tanned except for his neck, where he always burned. The flesh there hung in scant wattles. He wore a mustache so long the ragged white ends hung nearly to his jaws. A sham gunslinger's mustache, many thought it, but no one used the word sham to Eldred Jonas's face. He wore a white silk shirt, and a black-handled revolver hung low on his hip. His large red-rimmed eyes looked sad on first glance. A second, closer look showed them only to be watery. Of emotion, they were as dead as the eyes of the romp. I love that. And I think it does set up that this is a character to be feared, but also like there is something kind of cool about him. So,
and he's also, I think in the comic they get into this too, but he's lowborn to like kind of a peasant farmer. So you could see that as a poor kid, becoming a gunslinger would have been his way of climbing society in Gilead or Gilead. Right. And, so there's just going to be this bitterness that wells up over and over. So it's not just that he doesn't like Roland and his crew, but it's the fact that they succeeded where he failed. It just creates so much resentment.
Yeah. And I think like the fact that right before when Roland shoots him at the end, he does get the ball briefly in his hand. And I think what you're saying, Dan, about him being lowborn and having, in a lot of ways, the world has worked against him, unlike Roland, who it's worked for. Right. But that he gets the ball in the end, he has that moment where he sees the power that he could have, like all that he's wanted for his whole life, and it almost drives him mad quicker than it did Rhea or anybody else, because it just seems as if he's like, finally, I have this power. This is the power I've always wanted, and Roland cuts him down. One
more comment on the Roland cutting him down, though, is I think there is that moment of recognition where he says, like, Roland is the fastest gunslinger I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it's one thing that to have, like, Eddie and Jake comment on Roland's speed, but to have someone who's in the know be like, wow. Yeah. And the fact that he got so close to being a gunslinger, and yet Roland is still leagues ahead of him in terms of skill. And it just shows you Roland is at a whole nother level here.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I think that's
the line
important.
Of Eld.
Yeah. And I think, too... I think they do a great job with his cronies, the other big coffin hunters. I love the kind of contrast that they cut, because you have Roy DePape, who's kind of this slovenly bully who is at the same time very dangerous, somebody who will kill at the drop of a dime. But then you've got Clay Reynolds, who is somebody who's smarter, who's kind of a dandy almost, like they kind of describe him as being very fashionable and handsome and things like that. But at the same time, there's kind of a pathetic quality about him too, and you kind of get the vibe that these are second-rate guys who may not be as talented as Roland, but they have sort of they have less virtue. These are people who will do things that other people won't, and that makes them very good at what they do. So they're great. Yeah, they're great villains.
Yeah, it's crazy to hear. Like, I think they say DePape's like 25 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when they're like, I think Jonas is like twice Reynolds' age, and you're just like, man, and I'm sure they have like 10 years on Roland and his friends, so they are formidable. But I just think of like the bullies in these Stephen King books, and like they're essentially so young, but they're evil and very, very capable at that age. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on Jonas or the other coffin hunters?
Love the tattoo.
Yeah. Hey, maybe I'm going to get it now. God, that would be so dumb, but I'll probably do it anyways.
You can put it on the web of your toe. That way it's there.
Yeah, then I can hide it a little bit.
Just take a blue pen and just do it with a blue pen. You can wash it. It'll wash out eventually.
Keep that for a week.
Yeah, I like that idea. Cool. Let's talk about the ka-tet a little bit. I have a quote about Cuthbert here that I think is great on page 161. And I love this too because Roland always talks about the hanging of Hax, the cook. That is a memory he returns to often because it's kind of, I think, one of the first moments when his innocence was shattered a bit. And but here we have on page 161, Roland remembers watching it with Cuthbert, which I think is an interesting way to work Hax back in. And he says, let's see. Cuthbert was his oldest friend. The marks of their first teeth had been embedded on many of the same toys, but Roland had in some ways never understood him. Nor was it just his laughter. On the long ago day when Hax, the palace cook, was to be hung for a traitor on Gallows Hill, Cuthbert had been in an agony of terror and remorse. He told Roland he couldn't stay, couldn't watch. But in the end, he had done both, because neither the stupid jokes nor the easy surface emotions were the truth of Cuthbert Allgood. And I believe Roland has a line later, too, where he says that Cuthbert was somebody who he never quite understood. And I think that's because, I think they're built from different, I think their emotions and their hearts are built from different things. I think they have the same, virtues and ethics. But I think when it comes to their approach on life and the way they view the world, there is a difference there. But thoughts on Cuthbert?
There's sorry.
No,
there's
go
point
for it.
Later, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mark down like certain pages, but where they talk about Cuthbert in the sense of he laughs or he makes jokes because he's too uncomfortable to really kind of like delve into, or not even maybe uncomfortable, but he doesn't really know yet, especially as a young man, how to react or deal. So like comedy is like his kind of crutch or his ability to understand and process the world. But like you said in that intro for him, there's a whole other world beneath him. And there's a lot of people, you meet in this world where, they're the class clown or whatever, but it's like how they use to distract from like the things that kind of are difficult for them to process or they don't really know how to speak about. So like their response is laughter because it's the easiest thing to get through or to help get through.
Yeah,
totally. I think my dad's like that. I remember him telling me my pet hamster had died, and he couldn't stop laughing while he was telling me because he's just uncomfortable with those. He's just uncomfortable with that, with those feelings at the time. And I feel like you see that with what was it? Ha Ha Heath of Gilead. I love that he names his horse Glue Boy. I mean, it just speaks like volumes of his character,
Yeah, I love that.
Need those kind of people.
But the fact that he's so
name.
The fact that he is so lethal, he's so good with his slingshot. I love that about him and how he gets the drop on Reynolds in the bar. But yeah, I do think he totally hides behind that comedy, but it's also his only way of really reaching people. I think, that's why Shimi like falls in love with him essentially. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of the thing that draws people to him, but it's also his mechanism for hiding himself, which is weird. It's like this double threat kind of situation.
I like him, and I think even within our group, there's a lot of jokers, and my family is very much like that, where we use levity to kind of cut tension. We're not a big crying family, but I think there is something to. Not that you're not taking it serious, but it's easier to kind of deflect the seriousness of the situation. And I think Cuthbert,
to break up the weirdness.
Yeah, exactly. Just like kind of laugh so you don't cry. But Cuthbert is much more diplomatic than Roland. Roland comes across a little stiff, but even when they meet the people in the town, Cuthbert's saying things. He's remembering people's names and faces. He makes some joke about how he sees, it might have been Susan even, but he sees a beautiful woman and he's like, let me just lay on the floor and look up at you and these tiles will cool me. And it's, and it's stuff that Roland couldn't do. And I think we should tie the talk of Cuthbert into Eddie. The way that Blaine is defeated is through Eddie's not taking it so seriously, right? Acting illogical. And, throughout the journey, he can't really process Eddie just as he couldn't process Cuthbert. But they still have a skill set there. And just because maybe they're hiding behind a grin doesn't mean they're not a serious person. They're just not as somber as Roland is all the time.
Right. Well, I definitely feel like he realizes that Cuthbert is that other side of him that he needs to balance. Like he may not understand it, but he needs that levity or he needs that other side of diplomacy to get things done, because there's not just the one way. And I thought Mac mentioned the slingshot, and it's that juxtaposition too of something so deadly, like something so childish, which is very much Cuthbert, but also deadly when it needs to be. And so, you know, you don't really take him serious when you first see him because he's joking, but you have this whole other world, this myriad of like emotion and ability that's going on behind the scenes with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's very, very, he's a nice guy at the end of the day. He's a very nice guy.
And he's a very welcome presence in this world. I think especially we know when we think of gunslingers, we know Roland. Roland is, you know, kind of joyless at times. So I think seeing a gunslinger who has that approach to life, who has a sense of humor, I think it does, like, it adds more context, and it allows us to kind of broaden our view of what a gunslinger is, which is very cool. And then we have Elaine, who I don't think is as well drawn, but there are things about the character that are very interesting, such as that he has the ability to shine to some degree. It's never explicitly called the shining, but I think they call it the sight in this.
The touch.
The touch. There it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but essentially he has that ability to, you know, sense things that are happening, or, you know when things are perhaps going awry. So yeah, I guess like, did you guys have the same connection with Elaine that you have with Cuthbert?
Honestly, no. He was just kind of there as like the third person. Like it felt like he was a good balance, but he just seemed like the balance put in place for Cuthbert and Roland. Like if it had just been an adventure of Cuthbert and Roland, I would have also been okay with that.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like I didn't connect with Elaine as much, but I also think that's because I feel like he is me in this story, like the mediator.
Yeah.
Like I just feel like that's the role I've taken in a lot of my personal life and stuff. So I feel like that's kind of where he is here. He's just there to like calm both of them down all the time, you know. And I guess you could say he's kind of like if Jake grew up, right? Because Jake kind of has the touch too, and before we moved on completely, I also say Eddie is also called Ka-mai, which is the cause fool thing. Roland calls him that, so I thought that was cool because it's almost like he's admitting to himself that he is kind of like Cuthbert. But yeah, Elaine, not a lot to do. Kind of wanted to see more, and maybe there's another story with him, but yeah, I mean, I still dug him. You know. Stockworth's cool.
Yeah, I think Elaine's probably the smartest of the three. He seems the most mature. He's kind of. I was actually thinking, because he's kind of like the sad emo boy. They say he's like quick to tears, but when you do get him upset, it's like especially scary because he never loses his cool. All three of them seem like different sides of Morrissey's personality. Like you have Elaine's sadness, Roland's self-seriousness, and Cuthbert's goofiness.
Yeah.
I think Elaine is important, and he breaks up a lot of fights. I think Mac was saying too, like the mediator. I think that's an important role, especially when you have personalities like Cuthbert and Roland that are so distinct and opposite. To have this guy that can kind of be like, all right, time to move on. Let's go. You really need. He's almost like the den mother, I guess, of the three. But.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Other characters. We have a whole handful of characters here. We have Shimi, obviously. We have sort of the palace intrigue, which involves Reimer, who I think is sort of a slimy character that I really enjoy. I just have one section here I'm going to read about him, but then we also have Thorin, who I think is kind of a fool in his own way character. But yeah, let me find this section with Reimer. Hold on. Oh, here we go. Old Dr. Death turned out to be Kimba Reimer, Thorin's Chancellor and Minister of Inventory. Roland suspected the title had been made up special for their visit. He was easily 5 inches taller than Roland, who was considered tall in Gilead, and his skin was pale as candle wax. Not unhealthy looking, just pale. Wings of iron gray hair floated away from either side of his head, gossamer as cobwebs. The top of his skull was completely bald. Balanced on his whelk of a nose was a pince nez. I'm probably saying that wrong. But I just find this character to be the perfect example of, I don't know, a government stooge / like slimy glad-hander who is kind of in it for himself. I think that's one of the things I enjoy about Wizard and Glass so much is there's a lot of really slimy characters that are very easy to hate. Which is fun. But what other characters stand out to you guys outside of Reimer or anybody else I've mentioned?
I like the mention of Sheb because it's just the fact that Sheb comes back in the Gunslinger.
Yeah, that is interesting.
The piano player in the bar. I thought just worth mentioning. But other characters, Shimi. Super important. He goes off with them at the end, and so I don't know. I kind of wish we did get more of that story. I hope King eventually gets to it. But it's just tragic. He really tries his hardest to help Susan at the end. That's just like tragic to me. Just how hard he tries to get back, and that the fact that he also, is it kind of posited that he also kind of has the shine a little bit?
I know that that's something that Glenn Mazzara was teasing in the Dark Tower pilot.
And maybe it was something that he was going to explore in that, and that wasn't explored fully here or something. Yeah.
I was going to say Shimi too. It's almost like Tolkien with the Hobbits, where he's unsuspecting. People underestimate him. And, it seems like Cuthbert is one of the few that recognizes like, okay, people maybe don't take this guy as seriously either, but there's something there beneath the surface. And I just think it's cool too how they, because they could have easily just written this character off as a fool that everyone picks on, but he did redeem himself. And I like too when he asked Susan for the kiss, it's like the tradition for the chart. And you're just like, and I think at the end too, she gives him a kiss on the mouth, and you just know that she like made his day. He was so building up the confidence just to ask for a peck on the cheek. So when he finally got one on the mouth, he must have felt like a hero,
Yeah. A character I wish they had delved a little bit deeper into was Olive Thorne. They kind of, she becomes an important character later. And I think that, I hate to keep bringing it up, but I think that Glenn had plans for Olive Thorne more so in the series than in the book. But yeah, she's this woman who, is Susan feels a lot of emotion for because, this Susan's essentially brought on to replace this woman in Mayor Thorne's life because she isn't attractive to him anymore and can't give him children anymore. And there is kind of this sadness that revolves around that character. And King kind of gives her a moment where she gets her revenge on kind of the patriarchy of this town. Sadly, it doesn't quite work out. But
she's a cuck.
Yeah.
I do love the scene though where he writes her like in the middle of the night. She still goes to his room after having a bad dream.
Yeah.
And that kind of conflicting of like she gets into bed because I was like, don't do it, girl. Let it like he's doing all these things to you and I know you still love him, but like don't lay in his bed. And she like holds his hand. And then the part where she wakes up later and he's like moved away from her. And it just kind of like broke my heart a little bit more for Olive because how they describe her as this like sweet, sad woman.
Yeah. That's a scene that there's a lot of things with King where he'll write kind of, I don't know, an aside for a character, and sometimes they're really great, and sometimes they're like, why did this need to be here? That's one where you could easily excise it from the book, but I'm glad he didn't because it's really beautiful writing and a really nice moment. I think that speaks to, just like it helps illuminate another corner of this universe. But other times, like in Firestarter or something, you'll just get like 15 pages about a character we never see again, and it's like I didn't need that. So,
the Ricochet people.
Yeah. And so any other characters we want to highlight before we move on?
I don't think so. I guess we're not really gonna talk about Eddie and Susan and Jake. I feel like we've fleshed them out enough, and nothing really crazy happens with them in this one.
I guess just Blaine, we've hit on a little bit, but I think watching his like circuits get scrambled is pretty funny. How it was, it's like when you see a robot malfunction, but I don't know if that I've seen a scarier robot or artificial intelligence than Blaine, so that was really cool.
Yeah, I love Blaine. I think that whole section is so well written, and it's such an interesting character for being, a disembodied voice inside of a train. But yeah, there is sort of this. I love that he's like gone mad, like it's an AI that has like lost its circuits,
It's so weird though, because like we were saying with the structure, like in my mind, when I was rereading it, I thought they defeated Blaine in book 3. So the fact that there was so much of him to start this book, I was like, oh yeah, I totally like breezed over that. Like, what did you think, Ayisha, the first time reading it, that the Blaine saga continued so deep into this story?
I think I kind of forgot, honestly, because at first, it's been a minute since I read The Wasteland. So I kind of, when I jumped back into it, I had to go back to the Wastelands and read like the last chapter one more time. But I actually like the pacing of having that first there, because you kind of jump into this adrenaline ride of having like this crazed robot hurtling you towards space, and you're kind of having this game of fools or game of wits, depending on which way you look at it. So I enjoyed having that. And then Blaine's kind of destruction as he's crashing, I honestly thought we would either lose somebody in that, or something terrible was going to happen, like Oi was going to die, and I was not prepared for that at all.
I know the stakes are so high there, like right out the gate, and it's weird because when I was coming back to these books, I was the same thing, Dan. I thought that Wastelands ended with the Oz stuff, and that all the Blaine stuff was wrapped up in 3. So it was kind of like, oh wait, that's the entire opening of Wizard, which is crazy. But yeah, he's described in the book as a nice old fellow with a habit of molesting the children. He from time to time leads into the bushes. That's the voice is described like that.
Yeah.
I was curious why they chose him as that too, like as a male too, as opposed to, I don't know, these major character points, because there's a point where he tells Jake how to, like, if he wants him to teach him how to like masturbate or hook up with a girl. I can't remember exactly. And these little side comments that Blaine would have, I just like the personality choice. I was curious for how King created Blaine.
Yeah, because isn't the other train that has been derailed in Wastelands, isn't that a female train?
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Or he refers to it as like his sister. It committed suicide, but yeah, it was like Blaine's only friend. But it is female voice.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, I'm glad we talked about Blaine. I think that's an important thing to discuss. But now that we've kind of talked about the characters, I think it's time to dig into the prose a little bit more. And we're going to start with the stuff that we hated in a section we call Misery.
She died. She just slipped away.
Slipped away? Slipped away? She didn't just slip away. You did it. You did it. You did it. You did it! You did it! You murdered my Misery!
Annie!
Welcome to Misery. Here we talk about the prose that drove us as crazy as a good old Blaine. I have one that I can kick us off with. I don't have a ton for this because I love this book, but there is one joke, and it's on page 335, and it's when the interlude when they go back to Kansas, and it's literally like right at the beginning. Eddie stirred around them, the thinny still whined like an unpleasant mother-in-law. Come on.
I don't know. You have a good relationship with your mother-in-law?
Yeah,
I do.
Hope she's listening, bro.
I just thought that was. I know. I just thought that was. King, you're a better writer than that. Come on. The thinny whined.
Was he having issues with his mother-in-law?
Yeah. I wonder what Tabby felt about that line. So
I don't know.
Maybe Tammy's mother had died, and he's like, finally, I can, make fun of this bitch. So any others, did you guys have any sections for Misery parts that didn't quite work for you?
Page 57, I think the Fu Manchu jokes didn't go over well anymore. It doesn't really land as well. I also thought it was interesting on page 77. I think there's a mention where he talks about no longer labeling gays as fruits. So it's like he's aware of changing terms and political correctness of these items, and so then it's like it leads you to believe like what? Then I don't know, like the future books or future writing. Like, well, if you're aware of that, then why are you doing this sometimes? But yeah, I didn't have anything else though. I mean that's of its time, obviously, and the Fu Manchu jokes, of course. But no, I really didn't have a lot of misery for this one.
Cool. Yeah, I don't either. I think this book is gorgeously written by and large, and Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt them. Misery is just shining through Randall. No, I mentioned just, the pacing at the end of the book is a little abrupt. Wasn't so much a quote, but for me, so Roland defeats Court. You have to defeat your teacher to become a gunslinger. Court's laid up, injured. Presumably, Elaine and Cuthbert would have to fight him to become gunslingers as well, but now they're fighting a diminished Court. So was their test into becoming a gunslinger as hard as Roland's would be? I've never gotten clarity on, like, would they replace the teacher with a healthy one? I'm probably thinking too much into it, but if that's the stuff I'm complaining about in this book, it speaks that it's, I think, pretty well written.
Right.
If you guys had thoughts on that.
Isn't DeCurry, is he also a gunslinger that...
Jamie DeCurry.
Jamie DeCurry could... Yeah. I kind of assumed that he would probably take over for Court.
Maybe one of the other gunslingers.
Yeah, that's interesting because Court's father was also the one. So maybe it's just like does Court have his son that's going to take over that we don't know about, kind of thing.
Did Court have any other brothers or siblings? I feel like Fardo had like another kid. Maybe I'm like remembering someone else in there. But yeah, I thought about that too. It was like, is Court the only person that they like fight, or how does this really, like, the test itself? How do they decide when and where, if you're like your teacher is laid up with a broken leg or whatever?
Yeah, because like as soon as he got hurt, I'd be like, all right, I call you out also, teacher. Like, now that you have one eye.
Just all beat him in the gang.
You sound like a real Jonas over here, taking advantage of the situation.
I'd be a big coffin hunter, I guess. But.
Cool. Let's move on to a section where we actually celebrate some of the writing, a section we call Word Processor of the Gods.
And we're going to make a new rule. Whenever I'm in here, you hear me typing. Whether you don't hear me typing, what the fuck you hear me doing in here, when I'm in here, that means that I am working. That means don't come in. Now, do you think you can handle that?
Yeah.
Fine. Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here?
Here in Word Processor, we share our favorite writing, our favorite passages, things that made us laugh, things that made us cry, all of that stuff. I can kick us off, like, literally right when we meet Rhea. I love this. This section made me laugh so hard. Men, she could not understand why so many women feared them. Hadn't the gods made them with the most vulnerable part of their guts hanging right out of their bodies, like a misplaced bit of bowel? Kick them there and they curled up like snails. Caress them there and their brains melted. Anyone who doubted that second bit of wisdom need only look at her knight's second bit of business, the one which still lay ahead. Thorin, mayor of Hambry, chief guard o' barony, no fool like an old fool. I just love that section. It was very funny. I feel like King doesn't make me laugh out loud too often, but that was a section that made me laugh out loud. So, yeah. Did you guys have any bits of writing that you wanted to highlight here? Yeah.
I've got one, or I've got a few actually. Page 15 in my version, there's a description of Blaine and Candleton Muties. It's like, overhead a full moon came out from behind a scrim of cloud, painting the clearing and the stream in the tawdry hues of pawnshop jewelry. There was a face in the moon, but not upon which lovers would wish to look. It seemed the scant face of a skull, like those in the Candleton Travelers Hotel, a face which looked upon those few beings still alive and struggling below with the amusement of a lunatic. In Gilead, before the world had moved on, the full moon of year's end had been called the demon moon, and it was considered ill luck to look directly at it. Now, however, such did not matter. Now there were demons everywhere. I kind of love that, how things are breaking down, and it's like some of the old legends don't even matter anymore because everything's just chaos.
Yeah, I love that. How about you guys?
Don't know if one of mine is more pound cake or not.
I feel like we usually don't see crossover between Word Processor and Pound Cake, so I'd be interested to hear this.
Well, so the one I saw, or one of the ones I had, was like on 247, where in my edition, where Susan is kind of running through the drop, and you kind of get bits and pieces of as you go through the book, how they describe the scenery and kind of what it looks like. But there's a point where it says, she saw only blue sky and low ridge-lined hills that curve gently like the line of a woman's thigh and hip and waist as she lies on her side in bed. And like, even though I was like, okay, we're equating this to another female body, at the same time, like, I visually could see, like, how, especially thinking of like Mother Earth and how that like kind of imagery is look or is in my head, I could visually see like a woman like lying in kind of the shape of the hills, and so visually that was a very evocative sentence. But then I was like, is this crossing pound cake, or is this like because he decided to describe it that way?
That's interesting. I do love that though. I think it's a good place for it. I've got one. I love this section. This is kind of a disturbing moment, but on page 312, this is when Susan is, I believe, trying on a dress at the palace, and Mayor Thorne comes up behind her and basically starts grinding on her. It's not really against her will, and there's something very pathetic about it. And she says, well, I'll just read this whole section. It didn't take him long. He rocked back and forth against her, moaning like a man with stomach cramps. At one point, he licked the lobe of her ear, and Susan thought her skin would crawl right off of her body in its revulsion. Finally, thankfully, she felt him begin to spasm against her. "Oh, get out, you damned poison," he said in a voice that was almost a squeal. He pushed so hard she had to brace her hands against the wall to keep from being driven face first into it. Then he at last stepped back. For a moment, Susan only stood as she was, with her palms against the rough, cold stone of the sewing room wall. She could see Thorin in the mirror, and in his image she saw the ordinary doom that was rushing at her, the ordinary doom of which this was but a foretaste, the end of girlhood, the end of romance, the end of dreams where she and Roland lay together in the willow grove with their foreheads touching. The man in the mirror looked oddly like a boy himself, one who's been up to something he wouldn't tell his mother about. Just a tall and gangly lad with a strange gray hair and narrow twitching shoulders and a wet spot in the front of his trousers. Hart Thorne looked as if he didn't quite know where he was. In that moment, the lust was flushed out of his face, but what replaced it was no better. That vacant confusion. It was as if he were a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter what you put in it or how much, it always ran out before long. That was, I think, probably one of the more striking sections of this. And it helped me feel for Susan, I think, a lot, because that
was cemetery for me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was like, that was a cemetery scene for me.
Yeah, I think that's very, very scary, that scene. And it's just depressing. And I think very true, very honest.
I think that's the scene that, in my mind, tied to Macbeth, to the out, you damn poison, out, damn spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a creep. Thorin reminds me of like the mayor from Nightmare Before Christmas, and sometimes.
Oh, we forgot to talk about Sheriff Avery. That was
that guy.
He was a lot of my misery.
What didn't you like about him?
Just as a character, I mean, I feel like he was just the pound cake for Stephen King, like to throw in fart jokes whenever he wanted to.
I know, right?
That was his only role, like just this bumbling sheriff who thought he knew what was going on. I liked him as a character, but at the same time could not stand him, and I felt like if I was around someone, getting his head cleanly shot off was like a joy to me, but I was like okay with him dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought his death was kind of grotesque in a way that suited his the general writing of that character.
Oh, one quote that I was going to throw in too, just the mix. If it's Ka's will, it'll come like a wind, and your plans will stand before it no more than a barn before a cyclone. And I thought that was especially interesting with the Wizard of Oz connection later, to mention, a cyclone.
Yeah,
it was Wizard of Oz. The farm gets torn apart.
Right.
And one other one is the panic is highly contagious, especially in situations where nothing is known and everything is in flux. I forget who said that exactly. I think it was Roland observing like the townsfolk, but it might have been Jonas. But this idea that they know once panic sets in, it spreads exponentially and makes situations, much worse.
Mm-hmm. I've got another on page 361. This section I think is notable because I do remember, I believe in the very first Gunslinger book, Roland does have a vision. He does remember a woman in a window, and that section is on page 361, and I think it's quite lovely. I believe him and Cuthbert are riding into town, and he sees Susan through the window. Now the two of them rode silently toward town, both lost in their own thoughts. Their way took them past the Delgado house. Roland looked up and saw Susan sitting in her window, a bright vision in the gray light of that fall morning. His heart leaped up, and although he didn't know it then, it was how he would remember her most clearly forever after. Lovely Susan, the girl at the window. So do we pass the ghosts that haunt us later in our lives. They sit undramatically by the roadside like poor beggars, and we see them only from the corners of our eyes, if we see them at all. The idea that they have been waiting there for us rarely, if ever, crosses our minds. Yet they do wait, and when we have passed, they gather up their bundles of memory and fallen behind, treading in our footsteps and catching up little by little.
I'm glad you got that one. I had the chapter 11, the girl at the window description, and then I had the paragraph 2 ghost comment.
Yeah. I love that.
So
and it's
good.
just, it's kind of, and it's sad too. And it's just a beautiful image, like the idea of these things following you. Like I love the way he sort of activates it with that metaphor. It's very lovely. Any others that you guys have?
Yeah. I'm not going to read it, but if you go to page 190 in the Plume edition, the 4th chapter, I guess, it's short, but it's really everything you want to know about the ka-tet, the 3 boys. It captures like everything in this simple exchange between them, if you read that. But a shorter passage on page 274, they looked at each other, said nothing except with their eyes, which said plenty, and went on. Roland found that effect of being this close to the thinny was cumulative. It wasn't a sound you could get used to. Quite the contrary, in fact. The longer you were in the immediate vicinity of Eyeball Canyon, the more that sound scraped away at your brain. It got into your teeth as well as your ears. It vibrated in the knot nerves below the breastbone and seemed to eat at the damp and delicate tissue behind the eyes. Most of all, though, it got into your head, telling you that everything you had ever been afraid of was just behind the next curve of the trail or yonder pile of tumbled rock, waiting to snake out of its place to get you. Anytime they talk about the thinny, like it's just like, oh God, it's scary. And then to continue that on page 275, beyond the jag in the canyon floor was something none of them had ever seen before. And when they got back to the bunkhouse several hours later, they all agreed that they weren't exactly sure what they had seen. The latter part of Eyeball Canyon was obscured by a sullen, silvery liquescence from which snakes of smoke or mist were rising in streamers. The liquid seemed to move sluggishly, lapping at its walls, which held in. Later, they would discover that both liquid and mist were a light green. It was only the moonlight, and that it had made them look silver. I just love all the descriptions of the thinny. It's such a weird thing in this book. So I
feel like I had some of those in Cemetery actually, because it's so freaky.
Oh yeah. Some of the actual events, yeah, definitely. But I love those in this, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I've got this is just a sentence, but on page 469, it's the way the chapter ends. Above them, Demon Moon grinned and winked one eye through what appeared to be a shifting scrim of blood. I just found that very evocative. And I love when King, I think I put this as a room 237, but I won't touch too much on it. But King loves to sort of like anthropomorphize the moon and sort of give it faces. And I love the idea of it winking. It's just it's like a weird sort of perverted kind of shot that I absolutely love. So yeah. Any other word processors before we head into the dusty halls of the cemetery?
Can I do just one, just to keep it with Cuthbert, light-hearted? So I found the quote. It's when he does show up at the first town dance when he first sees Susan, and he's like, might I recline briefly at your feet, miss? Your beauty has loosened my knees. I'm sure a few minutes looking up at your profile from below with my back on these cool tiles will put me right. And I just think it's so funny. It's such a charming line. And it's hilarious, too, that his last name is Allgood, because it makes me think of, like, Saul Goodman, which is like, Cuthbert, it's all good.
That's right.
That is funny.
I had a few more. I didn't have stuff for these sections. So I got to do it.
Yeah, do it.
Page 602. Just a sentence. In his head, the lunatic buzz of the thinny, that rotting sore eating through the flesh of reality, joined with the lunatic laughter of the witch, and he knew better. Death for you, life for the crop, char you tree, oh Susan. When he's, I think that's when he's looking into the glass, and then on page 608, just that moment where Susan's burning when she yells out, "Roland, I love thee." The crowd fell back, murmuring as if uneasy at what they had done. Now that it was too late to take it back, here was not a stuffy guy, but a cheerful girl they all knew, one of their own. For some mad reason, backed up against the Reap Night bonfire with her hands painted red. They might have saved her given another moment. Some might have anyway. But it was too late. The dry wood caught, her pants caught, her shirt caught, her blonde hair blazed on her head like a crown. Roland, I love thee. Ugh.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And then I love that last description on page 611 where the thing that rode west with them towards Gilead was not Roland, or even a ghost of Roland. Like the moon at the close of its cycle, Roland had gone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All of those I have like, scattered in my notes as well. So it's good stuff. Cool. Well, my spine is not tingling enough. So whenever I feel that way, it's time to make a trip to the cemetery.
What's the bottom of the truth?
Well, sometimes that is better. The person you put up there ain't the person that comes back. It may look like that person, but it ain't that person. Because whatever lives in the ground beyond that cemetery ain't human at all.
Here in the cemetery, we talk about the scariest moments of a King book. And I wouldn't necessarily call Wizard and Glass a horror novel, but I'd say I had more things here than I have for, some of King's perhaps more proper horror novels. I think that I think you talked about the Thinny already, and I think a lot of my stuff revolved around that. So that's great. And then it's funny, Ayisha, that you said that you had the Thorin stuff in the cemetery, because I had another section that I had written down that wasn't the one I read, but it's like the page right before that. And I was wondering if you had noticed that too, which is, like basically when he first shows up and he says, this daydream was so strong that at first Susan responded to the arms which curled around her waist from behind, arching her back as they first caressed her stomach and then rose to cup her breasts. Then she heard a kind of plowing, snorting breath in her ear, smelled tobacco, and understood what was happening. Not Roland touching her breasts, but Hart Thorin's long and skinny fingers. She looked in the mirror and saw him looming over her left shoulder like an incubus. His eyes were bulging. There were big drops of sweat on his forehead, in spite of the room's coolness, and his tongue was actually hanging out like a dog's on a hot day. Revulsion rose in her throat like the taste of rotten food. She tried to pull away, and his hands tightened their hold, pulling her against him. His knuckles cracked obscenely, and now she could feel the hard lump at the center of him.
Ugh.
But yeah, like the obscenely is just so nasty.
Yeah, watching that whole scene, honestly, and I think there's a point where he like drools on her as well.
Yeah.
That was all cemetery. And there's a point where he also traps her in a hallway and like fills her up. But when I was reading that scene, it actually brought me back to this night when I first moved to Korea, and they'd have this thing called booby time, which is what they would do is turn off the lights when you're in the club. And I remember dancing when the lights went off, and then suddenly feeling hands that I did not know who they were attached to. And then the horror of when the lights turned on, and it was like this old, like weird man who was like rubbing up on me. So I kind of definitely felt that fear that Susan definitely went through. But yeah, it was more the writing of it. Like it made your skin crawl, and it made me kind of like visibly want to like throw up. And even just when he would describe how was it Jonas and Coral would make love.
Yeah.
Those were cemetery. Just the detail of like talking about it made my skin crawl. I don't know why.
Yeah.
It just was a lot of cemetery for me.
What do you guys have in the cemetery?
I just have the whole Susan's medical exam. I just thought that whole thing was freaky, and the fact that she upsets Rhea and Rhea curses her to shave her head after having sex. And at first you're like, what is she? Because you could tell she put some kind of incantation on her, but you're not sure what it is. So then when she finally does sleep with Roland, it takes his knife and starts carving it. You're like, oh, that is such a like witch's curse. So freaky.
I always thought that was going to be much that she was supposed to like kill him.
That's what I
right
thought
after.
too.
Yeah.
So when it's the hair, I was like, oh, I kind of was like, well, that's awful too, but it's not half as
There's
bad
a
as
point
I thought it
though
was going to be.
they talk about how that's like the worst thing for a woman, and I was like, I would have thought like killing, like waking up and then murdering someone and then coming out of like your comatose state and finding out you murdered someone would be worse. But yeah, the other cemetery part I had was going back to that thinny. It was right after I think what Mac read, and it was the part where there's the bird flying over. As they watch the dark flying shape, or this is page 275 in the Plume edition that I have. As they watched a dark flying shape, perhaps it was the same one that had frightened them before, skimmed down towards the surface of the thinny. It snatched something from the air, a bug, another smaller bird, and then began to rise. Before it could, a silvery arm of liquid rose from the canyon's floor. For a moment, that soupy, grinding grumble rose a notch and became almost a voice. It snatched the bird out of the air and dragged it down. Greenish light, brief and unfocused, flashed across the surface of the thinny like electricity and was gone.
Wow.
And I was like,
love it.
Yeah, I have that written down as well. I love that.
Just thinking about it.
Yeah. I love this section where DePape talks about meeting Martin / Walter. He says, he's talking, like, they basically say, like, what does he look like? And DePape goes, he looks like other people. What do you mean? I don't hardly know. DePape looked embarrassed and bewildered, but dogged too, sticking to his guns. We only talked 5 minutes in all, but once I looked at him and thought it was the old bastard from Ritzy, the one I shot. A little bit later, I throw him a glance and think, hellfire, it's my old pa standing there. Then that went by too, and he looked like himself again. And how's that? You'll see for yourself, I reckon. I don't know if you'll like it much, though. I just thought that was so creepy. Like the idea of this person's face like changing in front of this person to, you know, people who he's wronged or that have wronged him. Very creepy kind of moment.
Yeah. It reminds me of like Robert Blake's character in Lost Highway.
Yeah.
The mystery man, where it's just like this weird uncanny valley smile that you're just like, what is wrong with you?
Literally one of my favorite characters in cinema is Robert Blake in that movie. Yeah. What else do you guys have? Anything else?
Yeah, when they're in Candleton town, the description of the town's really eerie, and like that it had that a bloated rat blind and dragging its guts behind it in a sack like a rotten placenta. Or the mention of the robot that's there, that's facing into the corner like a child that's been bad. It's just like weird, creepy stuff going on in that town. Reminds me of Blair Witch a little bit.
Yeah. One part where it wasn't scary as much as tense, but was the standoff that they have at the bar when the gunslingers first meet the big coffin hunters, where one draws a gun on the other, draws a slingshot, draws a gun, draws a knife, and it's just the tension just kept mounting. And I love that at the end, Roland kind of just by happenstance walked by the bar as it was going on, but I thought that was a very tense scene.
Yeah, I love that scene. Yeah, I've got a few others here that I like. I think like just Jonas's I mentioned it earlier, but when he destroys their cabin and just the casual cruelty of it, like let's see here. They're talking about he found some books, and books are a rarity there, and he says he opened it. In a firm woman's hand, he read, "To my dearest son from his loving mother." Jonas tore the page out, opened his jar of paint, and dipped the tips of his last 2 fingers inside. He blotted out the word mother with the pad of his 3rd finger, then using the nail of his pinky as a makeshift pen, printed cunt above mother. He poked the sheet on a rusty nail head where it was sure to be seen, then tore the book up and stamped on the pieces. Which boy did it belong to? He hoped it was Dearborn's, but it didn't really matter. And then later he like kills the pigeon, and then he removed pictures from frames and shredded them. The goods he scattered to all points of the compass, destroying as much as he could in the limited time he had. When he found a linen handkerchief in the pocket of a pair of dress pants, he blew his nose on it and then spread it carefully on the toes of the boy's dress boots so that the green splat would show to good advantage. It's so nasty, and he does it with such like a workman-like competency that it just unnerves me. So yeah. And then I've got one other, and then I'll let you go, Mac, which is the thinny when all of the Farson soldiers are going into it. There's just some good, what King would call revulsion, where he basically just gets really nasty in terms of the gore. So I love this bit on 598. Hendrix's horse went down, eyes rolling, bit-parted teeth snapping at the smoky air and splattering curds of foam from its lips. Hendrix fell into the steaming, stagnant water, and it wasn't water at all. It came alive somehow as he struck it, grew green hands and a green, shifty mouth, pawed his cheek and melted away the flesh, pawed his nose and tore it off, pawed at his eyes and stripped them from their sockets. It pulled Hendrix under, but before it did, Latigo saw his denuded jawbone, a bloody piston to drive his screaming teeth. Did you already read that one, Mac?
No, but I have it written down here,
okay.
So I'm glad you're reading it.
Yeah, because I wanted to make sure I didn't read that. But yeah, it's like, I just love that. It's so nasty. What else did you have?
Yeah, no, that I was going to read that one. And then just the idea of the people walking willingly into the thinny, just watching all of these people just like all of a sudden just like turn and like walk into the thinny because they just have lost it.
Yeah.
But a lot of mine was with Ray.
Yeah.
So like page 488, when they come upon her after she's just like gone, he says, "But look at her." The people almost moaned, "Look at her, Eldred." And it said he was. The thing inside the black dress appeared to be wearing the corpse of a putrefying snake around its throat for a necklace. She was so scrawny that she resembled nothing so much as a walking skeleton. Her peeling skull was only tufted with hair. The rest had fallen out. Sores clustered on her cheeks and brow, and there was a mark like a spider bite on the left side of her mouth. Jonas thought that last might be scurvy bloom, but he didn't really care one way or the other. What he cared about was the ball appraised in the dying woman's long and shivering claws. I think she's just frightening as hell, especially when page 552, when she's like feeding off of Cordelia's cut. She's drinking.
Oh yeah,
blood.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
And I teased it earlier, but when Ermot slithers between Ray's legs, the place she liked him best, and she says, "There weren't many men who could do you like Ermot."
I want to know how that began.
I know.
Oh man, I don't know. And then Musty, the description of Musty with limbs hanging, forked tail, a cat crossed with a spider. Randall,
yeah,
you can have Musty.
I'll take Musty gladly.
Sounds frightening.
I will save Musty. Musty will save me.
The only other thing I wanted to mention was the description of the superflu eating through the fabric of existence like battery acid, eating its way into a piece of cloth. I just like that description a lot. And then this is one last sad line where he unbuttoned his shirt, made in a part of Midworld she would never see, and took her in his arms. And just again, it's just like that little foreshadowing he keeps doing throughout about Susan just never, like, she's not going to make it out. And it doesn't matter how many times that he says that or he marks that in the book, because there are so many times where you think that she's going to get it and then she escapes, that I still wanted to believe, even though I knew, and I'd read this before, that maybe this time she gets away, and it just doesn't. It's just not going to happen. And that's just like a piece of cemetery throughout the book for me.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can say that I am thoroughly spooked having been in this cemetery, and I've worked up quite an appetite, which I'm going to slake it pout cake.
After all you've been talking, everyone in bad, Mama, everything in the sin. Come to your closet and pray, ask to be forgiven. He's a nice boy, Mom. You like him. You really like him, Mama.
We're going to pound cake. Here we are in Pound Cake. This is where we talk about the stuff that, the blue stuff, the stuff that perhaps made us laugh for unintentional reasons. I just want to say, looking through my notes here, next to various page numbers, I've written farts, balls, fart. Those are various ones that I have. I probably don't need to read all of them. I think that sums it up to some degree. But I have plenty of others, but including on page 109, this is when Roland is with the prostitute he loses his virginity to. And then it says, she was up out of bed across the floor and out the door before her bare bum had more than a brief moment to twinkle in the morning sun. And I just wrote, do asses twinkle? Is that a thing that asses do?
Yes, in the morning daylight it does.
I know. I feel deprived because I've never seen a twinkling ass. So,
now.
Well, I see it in my mind's eye now. What else do you guys have?
I had page 30 when Blaine asks Jake if he'd like to have his first sexual encounter with Marilyn Monroe or Raquel Welch. and he says, a noted sex goddess from your level of the tower when he mentions Edith Bunker.
Oh, yeah.
I like that he does comment, though, on the Jake's level of the tower. Like his existence is one of the levels of the tower. I thought that was an interesting description, though. Page 129, out of old Thorin's nightshirt it'll come, stiff as a stick and as red as rhubarb.
That's awful.
I love the he at the end, the HEE exclamation point. Oh man.
There's a ton where they were just talking about Jonas after he had no, I can't remember what page it was on, but it was before the Citgo oil wells explode. So he's giving it to Coral. And as they're in the throes of it, the bombs go off, and it was in that period of time where you just can't stop. There's nothing you can do to stop it, so they had to keep plugging through. And then they talk about how Jonas walks to the window with his dick swinging back and forth like I think it was like a crazy man or a silly man magician's wand.
Yes, I love that. Yeah. I wrote that down too.
I was like, I didn't need to know about Jonas's wang flying around. It was like an added extra of just like, yeah, and just in case you didn't know he was already naked, which I said, here's his dick flapping around.
we needed to know.
Just in case you missed it.
I put this in Pound Cake, even though I kind of liked it. When Shimi goes to see Rhea and she goes, would you care to come in for a bit? She whispered, and then pointed a finger at his crotch. If I give you a little bit of mushroom to eat, special to me it is. I can look like anyone you fancy. Oh, I can't, he said, clutching his trousers and smiling a huge, broad smile that felt like a scream trying to get out of his skin. That pesky thing fell off last week, it did. I just think that's hilarious. And
how clever he is.
I know, and so anyways, but I still put it in Pound Cake, but I just do think it's funny that she's trying to bone Shimi, and it's just pretty nasty. But
well, he doesn't have Ermon anymore, so she's looking for somewhere.
she's really reaching. Yeah, she's trying everything now.
Just with Rhea, one part that she mentions after she sticks two fingers into Susan and says, "Cocked tight, ye are."
Yeah,
it's a gross. And then also when she rubs Susan's clitoris, and she's like a little butt of silk. Just
I actually wrote a song called The Thinny, and it's out there. I'll post it. But I mentioned that in it about the bud. Ugh, gross.
Mm-hmm.
Creepy.
I gotta hear that song.
I don't have the page number, but DePape. It says that DePape didn't know what there was about her that Eldred found so fascinating. When he himself looked, he only saw an ugly bitch with a big nose and mosquito bump titties.
He's used mosquito bump boobs before, King has. Yeah, I've got I just think this was funny. Page 291, Roland sensed the moment rushing at them. Somehow he managed to step away from her, and she stepped back from him, her eyes wide and her cheeks flushed. He could see that flush even in the light of the newly risen moon. His balls were throbbing. His groin felt full of liquid lead. I feel like it didn't need the balls are throbbing part. King has this habit of writing a really beautiful couple sentences and then just throwing the word balls or asshole in there, and it always kind of makes me laugh. But yeah,
like writing Tourette's.
I know. And then I thought it was just funny, but they were talking about Coral, and she's described as having a narrow but uninteresting thigh, which was just seemed a very strange way to characterize a person's thigh. Narrow but uninteresting. So very strange to me. Never fully got that one. Any other ones that we have here?
I'm full.
Full Pound Cake.
I found one that, this is my last Rhea moment. It was like 1:30 where she's talking about what Thorne wanted, and she says, pish tush, spare me the codswallop and pretty words. He wants tits and arse that don't squish in his hands and a box that'll grip what he pushes. And I was like, straight to the point. It covers a lot of things, but I just like how she was just straight up tits and arse and a box that can take it.
Yeah. I gotta say, I love some of Sheriff Avery's farts, just like on page 260. Yes, sir, Sheriff Avery said, lifting one massive cheek a bit out of his rocker and letting off a noisy pre-luncheon fart. It's just funny to me, the idea of people like casually farting in front of people they don't know very well. I can't fathom ever doing that. One time I was at a party and I farted in front of some people. I didn't try to, it came out. And I made an audible fart in front of people I didn't know, and it was horrifying. And I just owned it, but it still haunts me to this day. It's probably about 7 years ago.
I did the same thing in grade school, and I was made fun of so intensely. I never did it again. I never farted
ever again.
Until this day, it's all inside of you.
Oh man.
Cool. Well, I think that's about all the pound cake we can stomach for this episode. So let's walk it off in a place we call King's Dominion.
There's another world out there.
I know there is.
Here in King's Dominion, we talk about connections to other King works in this book. And obviously, as we discussed, there are so much. This is a book that, we already talked about the afterword, where King talks about how this book is sort of what helped him realize that all these books are connected. And we have Captain Trips, we have Randall Flagg, we have all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of the obvious ones that we've talked about. But let's talk about maybe the broader ones, yes. But do we have any Room 237s? Some stretches, perhaps. Mac, you're usually good at this section.
Oh God. So you want me to talk about Room 237 first, or
no? I'd say start
legit
with the broad
ones.
Stuff, maybe.
Okay,
let's do some legit ones.
I think page 66, the speaking of the Thinnies and the creatures they flew over with Blaine is very. Well, I think we mentioned this too in Wasteland, but I think it's akin to like the creatures from the Mist. Mm-hmm. Susan tells Will, page 150, that there are 19 working oil derricks.
Yep.
You have the explanation on page 222, the totem in the town of the guardians of the beam, bear, turtle, fish, eagle, lion, bat, and wolf, 7 of the 12. I like that they blatantly say that. I just don't think you get a lot of the guardian talk, but in this one, it's because you're living in that world. It's just much more just available.
Mm-hmm. 7 plus 12 is 19.
Oh, there you go. I had, this is more funny, but Susan, when laughing, stutters calling Mare Thorne's dog wolf. And I thought, talisman? That's a Room 237. But I liked Roland hypnotizes Susan like he does with Jake in prior books with the shells on the knuckles. Mm-hmm. That's just kind of a throwback. I don't want to burst into them all if other folks had some.
Yeah, I've got a lot of what I have are Room 237s, but I have a couple that are just deep. Like we just did Desperation, so I'm sure Pfleegor, you might recognize this one as well. But on page 265, there's a mention of. Let me see if I can find the actual quote. But yeah, there's a reference of the foothills, and they describe. Yeah, here we go. From the outside, they were just holes punched into the barren, rocky earth, holes like staring eyes, each with its own pile of till and scrapings beside the added. Holes like eyes is a phrase that recurs often in Desperation, which we just covered. So it's kind of neat how these phrases, I think, bury themselves in King's head and manifest in other books. Similarly, there's a reference to a bool, B-O-O-L, which is kind of used as like a prank or a game, and that ends up coming back in Lisey's story, which we're covering next month. So I'm just rereading that right now. So that was one that stood out to me as well.
Yeah,
and then obviously,
Bull at the end.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And then obviously, Mac, I'm sure you have some turtles to talk about.
Not so much. No, Roland straight up talks about hearing the voice of the turtle. at one point.
Yeah.
I think I had that written here somewhere, but I can't find it anymore.
There's also the phrase "bless the turtle."
Yeah, yeah. Susan says "stand and be true," and that's in Midworld, so I thought that was kind of cool. The mention of the Manny, old Sunni went to become one of the Manny. I mean, that's a little foreshadowing, but I don't think that's giving away too much or anything.
Yeah.
And then also the mention on page 100 of the Sombra real estate and Mills construction is mentioned again. So and that comes into play in the future.
Yeah, I usually get pretty conspiracy theory with the direction they're traveling, because if you're traveling with the beam or against the beam, it usually determines whether you're in for a good fate or a dark fate. The only really, because they kind of are sitting there having the Pavlar most of this book, but they do travel to Topeka, which is mentioned in The Stand, obviously, and ties to Wizard of Oz. The one other one I had was the regulators. The big coffin hunters are referred to as regulators.
Yeah, I caught that as well. Yeah,
I didn't catch that.
Yeah. I forget who says that. And also Mother Abigail is mentioned by name in this story. And he says, I think Roland says, she's on a level of the tower that we're on right now, but she's like, but that's a different story for a different time.
Yeah. I've got some Room 237s. On page 391, I actually had read the section where Jonas is destroying their cabin. When he puts the piece of paper he writes cunt on, he pokes it on a rusty nail head. It's kind of, King talks about it in writing, and I think in Danse Macabre too, that, he used to pile his rejection letters. He'd put them on a nail that he had put into his wall when he was a kid, and that's how he kept them. So he uses that image, I think, pretty often in his work. But that one stood out to me. On page 237, speaking of, there's a reference to somebody with the last name Rennie, which of course made me think of Under the Dome, Big Jim Rennie, Jr.
Yeah.
Page 76, there's mention of Terre Haute. We all know what happened to Trashy in The Stand in Terre Haute. I think King loves the name of that town because he mentions it in a couple different books. And and I've got a few other ones, but what else do you guys have?
I've got... I like to mention that he refers to the ka-tet as the Fellowship, so there's another nod to Lord of the Rings. I think I think that's it for my legit ones. You guys ready for some Room 237?
Yeah, bring it on.
Page 41, there's mention of Electric Blue Eyes, which I could only hope is actually referencing the song, the Arcade Fire song.
That's the way you talk.
like it had never even come out yet. Page 90, they talk about Gage Park, Pet Cemetery.
I think that one's a good one.
Page 123. I don't know who says this, but I'll give ye payday for walking in early on old Ray, so I will. Oh, it's Ray. I said, will that be a chocolate payday, Ray?
I've got a Room 237 on page 98. Yeah. There are ghosts, Jake said, and in his eyes, Eddie saw a shadow of the horror he must have felt inside the house in Dutch Hill. The horror he must have felt when the doorkeeper came out of the wall and reached for him. Sometimes there are ghosts, and sometimes they come back.
Oh, boy.
Bum, bum, bum.
Page 216, R.B. DePape, and all I could think of was RB from Potter, as in Regulus Black, because he's a big Potterhead, and he even works that in to the next book. But page 222, I had what sort of work could they do in Hambry if it got around that the boogeymen were afraid of the children instead of vice versa? And it's always fun to hear mention of Mr. Bozeman. And then my last Room 237 was page 276. Roland attempts to stop Elaine from walking into the thinny. And he says, "Where do you think you're going?" said Roland. Elaine looked at him with sleepwalker's eyes. We got sleepwalker mentioned in this.
He'd made sleepwalkers by this point, so I think it's definitely a reference.
I think absolutely.
Page 109, we got a blue chambray alert.
Oh, nice.
I think that's always worth noting. And then, Mac, you actually mentioned this section earlier. On page 46, I believe, Blaine is described as somebody who had a voice that would lead you into the bushes, which of course made me think of the library policeman, which is exactly what happens. A boy is led into the bushes by, a nefarious character. You can go back to our library police episode, which Ayisha, I believe you were on.
Yeah. I was just talking about that book today.
Yeah. That's a good episode. So, I think that's all the ones that I have as well.
Can I say one that's a very loose connection? So I was trying to find a certain quote, and I was just, typing the quote into the search engine. And there's actually a typo in one of the editions, and it says, Ronald nodded to Cuthbert. So I thought maybe there's an alternate dimension where Roland is actually Ronald.
Ronald.
At what level of the tower is that?
Ronald.
I had a couple more random connections. Not really room 237, but at page 201, it says they echo "So Say We All," which is a saying from Battlestar Galactica. I like that ZZ Top's Velcro Fly is being sung by Blaine when he's going crazy. Love it.
We got a lot of ZZ Top heads on the pod.
And then I think a really great band name is it says Blaine could have been the ka-tet's coffin. And I'm like, ka-tet's coffin for a band name, please.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I think that's a very hearty serving of King's Dominion in this book, obviously. And I think from here on out, I think King's Dominion is going to be a pretty packed section, because King is going to start getting pretty comfortable weaving his books in and out of each other. So I think it's time to wrap this up with our final thoughts.
Dad, can we go now?
You ready?
Yeah, we've been ready for an hour.
Okay, I'll be right there.
You said that a half hour ago. Yeah, my dad's weird. He gets like that when he's writing.
Here in Final Thoughts, we share our Bright Red Pennywise Clown Nose rankings, as well as our MVP of this story. So, Mac, why don't you kick us off? What is your Pennywise Clown Nose rating and your MVP of the Dark Tower 4 Wizard and Glass?
Well, Dad rat it and God's cuss it, because I'm sad to be wrapping it up here. I love this book. I was very, very happy to be finishing it again. I just think it's such a great, for a book, for me to be so against reading it when it got to that backstory, and then to be just clenching it with my hands, like you couldn't have tore me away from that story at the end. I think is just such a triumph. And for me, although the Emerald City stuff in the last 50 pages really is just thrown in there in the last 50 pages, to me, it's not a detriment to the book. I just think it's kind of just like a little extra, like a cherry on top. You don't need it, but sure, I'll eat it anyways. For me, this was and is still a 5 bright red Pennywise Clown Noses for me. I love it. I think it's just going to get better every time I read it. It's just, I think it's got some great passages, which we read a ton of. And it just makes me really excited again to get to Wolves of the Kala.
Yeah. Well, who's your MVP?
Oh, my MVP is Cuthbert.
The man himself.
I love Cuthbert in this. He's so, I just forgot how much he's in this book, and how just the part he plays. I just love it. I love him and Roland's relationship. It's just so true.
Yeah. Cool. Ayisha, what is your Bright Red Pennywise Clown Nose ranking and your MVP?
Oh, so difficult. Okay. I would go, honestly, as I was telling my friend about this, initially when I first started reading the Gunslinger series, book 1 was terrible for me, and it was like, when you all asked me to do the second book, I was like, I don't know if I can even stomach going into this, but it got better. And with this one, even though when I first looked at the book and how many pages, I was like, this is so daunting. I'm like, don't know if I'll be able to finish this in time. Once I picked up and got into the story, especially when you start to get the background with the relationships between him and Susan and Cuthbert and Elaine, I definitely got sucked into that story. Like I said earlier, I kind of forgot that Eddie and Susanna and Jake were anything kind of important. So I would say four bright red wise noses. Yeah, I'm gonna go with 4.
And your MVP?
My dark horse is Shimi.
Love it.
Coming out of the side gate. When he suddenly, I mean, I kind of figured more and more that they kind of included him. He was going to be someone who was an influential role. And it was just kind of like, part of me wanted to be like, oh, is Shimi going to be like, he was smart the entire time and he was just playing everyone for the full? A little disappointed he didn't, but he was definitely my favorite character.
Nice. Dan Pfleegor, Bright Red Pennywise Clown Noses, MVP.
Okay, so I had a similar experience to Ayisha. Like when I first started reading The Gunslinger, the first book didn't pull me in as quickly. But once I got to Drawing of the Three, I was like, this is so good. This is so different. And I think the run of books 2, 3, 4, 5 are very strong. But 2, 3, 4, I think, is the strongest trilogy in the entire Dark Tower series. You know, I think this book just really, I did not expect it to be a flashback. I did not expect the romance, but I was pleasantly surprised. I really enjoyed it. I started reading this right after we did the Wastelands episode and had to slow myself down because I knew we wouldn't get to this episode for quite a while. But because of that, it's probably my favorite book in the Dark Tower series, and it's in my top 5 Stephen King novels. So I have to give it 5 bright red Pennywise clown noses.
MVP?
And MVP, because Max said Cuthbert, I'm going to go with his brother and say the fact that Eddie defeated Blaine with his dead baby jokes cracked me up so much. I think it's so funny, and it's such, like, I don't think anyone saw that coming.
Yeah, it's so clever. It really is, yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Randall? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I love this book. It's always been one of my favorites, and rereading it did not disappoint. I think this book is great from top to bottom, but I think the last 100 pages of the Hambury storyline is like the way that, because King's always good at, taking all these disparate storylines and kind of funneling them down into this, into this climax that is just, unspeakably amazing. And the build of this, the way that, Susan's story, Shimi's story, Jonas's story, and Roland's story and Rhea's story, the way all of those things converge upon each other. And it's like, and it's very cinematic in its own way too, that the final 100 pages, like the explosion of the gas, of the oil tanks, the way that they, maneuver Latigo's men into the Thinny, all these things are so satisfying. But I think he really nails that final moment between Jonas and Roland. And Jonas literally screams in his head. He's like, and you had mentioned this, Pfleegor, but he's just like, it's the ghost of Arthur Eld, and he's come for me. Like, that's his last thought before he gets shot in the head, which to me is like so striking and so dark and so interesting. And really just beautifully done. And I think that there's the various climaxes. It's literally just like a string of explosions that all hit at the exact right moment. And I think it really works. Yeah, if there's any kind of detriment to this book, it's kind of that last, almost epilogue where we come back to the main world and we're reeling from that flashback. And then we suddenly get like TikTok Man and Randall Flagg and Crimson King and Wizard of Oz Castle. It's a lot to absorb in like 50 pages. And but it does, really tease the next book, and I can't even put into words how excited I was and eager for Wolves of the Callow when it came out. So I adore this book. 5 bright red Pennywise clown noses for me. And I do think it's been cool to hear some of like the criticisms that you guys have brought. And I do think that those are all totally valid, but I think in the larger canon of King's work, I think that he does so much so well in this book that it just sticks with me, and thrills me. My MVP is Rhea because she's the ultimate wildcard character. I love her. I love her journey. I love how evil she is. I love how funny she is. And I love the way that this character who you're watching rot and deteriorate ends up, being like the greatest villain, the one who kind of does the most damage ultimately. She really ruins all these people. And I just adore her. And she's such a unique creation, especially for King. I feel like he's great at writing bad guys, obviously, but I think she's on another level. So I love her. So yeah. So that's, it's probably one of the better rankings we've given a book.
Can I say,
yeah,
it actually adds up to 19 when you add our 4 scores.
I think that says something.
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
Our next book, we usually go chronologically, but we are mixing it up because Lisey's Story premieres on Apple TV Plus very soon after this episode drops. And we're going to be doing some coverage around the TV series, but we're also going to do a book episode about Lisey's Story, which we're very excited about. So expect that. And then after that, I think we're going to take a break from King and do a Danse Macabre. We're not sure which book we're going to do yet, but we are going to do one of the books he mentions in that. And then I believe our next book after that is Bag of Bones. So get reading on that one. It's good. And and expect lots of other exciting things on the horizon for this podcast. It's all very exciting, lots of good stuff. And also I would just like to plug, if you are a Patreon subscriber, our episode about Michael Jackson's Ghosts that King worked on, that Ayisha was on that episode. I would highly recommend listening to that. I think it's a really fascinating episode that is available to our Patreon subscribers at the Barrens. So hit that up and sign off with me, y'all. Long days and pleasant nights.
I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. But you know you want somebody to treat you good.
This has been a bloody, disgusting show. Thanks for tuning in. If you like our programming, consider searching for other bloody, disgusting podcasts, such as Creepy, Horror Queers, The Boo Crew, SCP Archives, Nightlight, Margaret's Garden, Nightmare on Film Street, and more.